order. We will call the meeting to order at 5 o'clock.
Can we do a test, Alex?
Pardon me?
Let's do a test first.
Pardon?
Mickey, do you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you.
So, and who's monitoring to make sure we let everybody in?
I didn't lock it this time.
Okay.
Yep.
So we've got the meeting called to order. Can we get an approval, or I should say a motion to approve and a second for the approving the agenda?
I'll move to approve the agenda.
I second.
Is there any changes to the agenda other than?
I would just move A to D and D up.
Okay.
It makes sense that that's a better progression.
Got it.
And I have a question concerning D. Did we get any additional paperwork for that? I mean, do we have anything to look at?
The English language stuff?
Uh-huh.
Well, you're on the committee call.
I know, boss, that's why I'm asking.
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, you got what was sent to us. So I think the issue is really there, just kind of give an update of what you're doing and where we're headed. What you think about how it's going.
Okay.
Okay.
Gonna be a long evening.
Maybe a fast meeting?
Maybe, that's even worse.
I'm out of here after 2 hours. That's the longest one.
What you gonna do in the morning?
It says 5 to 7. You're holding us to it? Okay. It's been motioned and seconded. Any further discussion on the agenda? All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay. And Mr. Chavez, would you lead us a flight salute, please?
Ready? Salute.
Pledge
allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So I believe we're going to skip A for the moment, and we're going to move on to discussion of fund balance policy. I believe it's in our packets. And Nikki, if you want to give us some background and why you think we should do what we're doing?
Sure. So the discussion has come up in the past regarding setting a policy on a reserve level. And currently the board policy does not set a particular percentage or dollar amount. The state minimum is that a district have our size would have 3%, and that's a very low amount. If you were to look at how much we would need in order to get through 2 months of operating expenditures, that would be about 17%. And that is generally what is recommended as a safe balance. It allows for districts to respond thoughtfully if there are economic changes, revenue changes that occur at the state level. And it also provides some stability for our cash flow. And as we saw coming into this year where the state did a pretty large amount of cash deferrals, we were able to make it through this year without having to do any borrowing, and borrowing can just create yet another expense for a district. So there's a lot of good reasons to have a healthy fund balance, but I also think it's important to have it set in policy. So the recommendation would be to add the language in to have a 17% reserve, and we have also had some further discussion regarding, especially right now, it's very relevant with the COVID funds that have occurred, how we would respond in terms of incorporating or not incorporating one-time funds or expenditure of one-time funds into the calculations. So if you have large one-time funds being expended, it can really swing that reserve amount quite a bit. And so in order to create a little bit more continuity and stability and to prevent those kind of large spikes, the recommendation could be that we include language something along the lines of if there are expenditures of one-time funds that come from a single source, that we exclude that from the calculation so as not to artificially spike what that reserve amount ended up being.
That makes perfect sense. I've got a couple questions.
Sure.
With respect to our budgeting process right now, if you pick any particular category, do we tend to inflate those numbers in order to build a little bit of fudge factor into any of those accounts, or do we actually try to budget based on what we actually expect that category to cost?
Well, it depends on the area of the budget in the sense that there are certain expenses that are quite easy to know up front exactly what we expect it to be. But there are areas that are just inherently variable in the budget, and there must be some room for unexpected things. So when you are dealing with maintenance budgets, when you are dealing with substitute costs, there is no way to know exactly what that will be. You know, those are all changeable from year to year and based on circumstance. And so in terms of budgeting, we are as accurate as we can be with anything that is very set, and we try to be appropriately conservative in areas where we need to have reasonable flexibility.
If you look at teachers, for example, if you have a year where you had multiple teachers, if we had multiple maternity leaves, you know, that money's got to come from somewhere.
Right.
You know, if we have a year where we have no maternity leaves and nobody has any long-term illnesses, we're over budgeted there. But we don't know that when we build a budget. You know that as you go through the year. The biggest issue for fund balance is to remember that our fund balance isn't a savings account that's just sitting at the bank waiting for us and we just keep throwing money into it. The fund balance is a product of, at the end of the year, if you spend the budget the way you said you would spend it, this is how much should be left. It's not a fund that just sits there with a bunch of money in it. It gets used all the time for cash flow. So when we have, there are certain times where we get state payments and we don't. For example, July and August, you know, we're not getting a lot of revenue. We're living off cash flows. So it's not like your savings account at home. This is, if you spend your budget the way you said you'd do, at the end of the year, you should have this much left. Now, the question is, when you budget, how much should this much be? Not, do you have one, because you're required to have a fund balance anyway. The real issue is, you don't want to get in cash flow problems, and it's not something that you can just go to. In July, I couldn't go to Nikki and say, hey, we need to do a $3 million expense. I know we have that much in fund balance. She's going to say, Mark, we don't have that cash on hand. So it's a product of spending your money the way you said you were, how much is left at the end. That's why we do annual audits, because the annual audit takes a snapshot of that day and says, this is what you said you were going to do, this is how you did it, this is what's left. The day after they take the snapshot, it's already changed. So just remember, it's not like at home, and it's not a savings account. It is a cash position that if you, at the end of the year, this is where you're hoping you're going to be.
Okay. I'm just trying to wrap my head around the idea that if we have a fund for unexpected expenses, essentially, and we have a variety of different budget accounts. For example, utilities is an example. We should have a pretty good handle on what our utility costs are year to year. And we should be able to budget pretty close to what our actual costs would be. Therefore, we don't need to, in theory, unless something drastically changed, you know, PG&E came out with a massive rate hike, for example, that we weren't anticipating, then we wouldn't want to be able, there's no reason to overinflate that that utilities account by 10-15% on the idea that maybe they, you see what I'm saying?
It is a moving target. I mean, I will say, like, utilities are changing all the time. I mean, it's, when you're at the volume of usage that we are, what may be perceived in a household as a small rate fluctuation can create quite large dollar differences for us. So, you know, it is an area that does have some variability in it.
I'll give you a good example. One of the things we're doing in the bond issue, I bought 6,000 LED 4-foot tubes. So every fixture in the district will be LED tubes next year. We're hoping that saves us replacement time, the light's better, all of that stuff. They use a quarter of the juice that the fluorescents do. We think we're gonna save a significant amount in electrical. Nikki's not budgeting for that savings because we don't know what it is yet. But that's a place where we're budgeted for acting normal, and hopefully we've done something to bring that cost down. Once you know what that cost is, then you can assume that the following year is gonna be lower as well.
I'm just trying to make sure that we don't build into the budget a 17% reserve for economic uncertainties, and we build in an additional 10, 15, 17% in every budget category on top of the other. See what I'm getting at?
No, the attempt is always to be as realistic and reasonable with the budget as possible. But again, I mean, there does have to be some room. I guess what I would say is I perceive there to be a difference between having like a true emergency that would necessitate dipping into the reserve, that is, you know, a $300,000 unforeseen circumstance, versus, you know, fluctuations that occur within, like I said, things like maintenance, budgets, substitute personnel expenses, utilities, and things of that nature. I do try to build a budget where I don't have to keep adding on to it if it's going up, like, but I'm not trying to add a lot of extra for no reason. I certainly would never take parts of our budget and be arbitrarily adding things that I don't think could actually happen.
I'll give you an example. I call it cleanup at the end of the year. So when you get to May, okay, what have we actually spent to what we budgeted? So Nikki cleans that up. I'm really disappointed in our budget and the fact that that cleanup doesn't result in a lot of cash. There's a saying in school, Christmas in June, before the July New Year. Well, we have some hard candy Christmases in June here. Because if there were dimes left, I'd be fixing more stuff.
Right.
And so Nikki budget's pretty tight. We're pretty accurate. We're not ultra conservative. We're certainly not on the liberal pad side at all. And part of that is the auditors would pick that up, and the auditors would tell you in your annual audit, hey, your business manager's loading up these things, so at the end of the year you have fund balance. They would tell you that. They would not allow you to do it.
Ultimately, like what Mark was mentioning, you know, in terms of the end of the year cleanup, so it's kind of a progression that happens through the year. The farther you get through the year, the more you know, more things have actually happened, you have a better basis for things for the year. And so by the time we get to this point where right now I'm doing the budget for next year, but it also includes the estimated actuals for current year. And the estimated actuals, you know, we've made it through the vast majority of the year, and that's the point at which I'm moving things off the books that we can see clearly will not be happening at this point. You know, we maybe planned that it could happen, it didn't happen, we don't need to keep that sitting there. So we don't, it's very fluid through the year, and we're trying to always be as responsive to real circumstances as possible.
And this would be the worst year that I can ever remember to try and actually go in and do that. Because We've been in session, we've been out of session, we've been distance learning, we came back into session, but we're partial. Food service has gone from bag lunches for 400 to now they're almost at where they normally would be now that we're back in session. Even though they're giving out lunches, we don't have lunchrooms, their numbers are hitting close to where they normally hit right now. So this is a crazy year to do it. I think your board philosophy and policy is what's really gonna be important. And the 2 months of expenses, that makes sense only from the standpoint of June and July and August are a long stretch
Right.
without a lot of revenue. And you have to make those happen. You're going to have, they used to call it the boiler fund. Well, fortunately, our boiler is no longer a problem at the high school. However, when you hit a couple diesel gas tanks out in the parking lot while you're doing construction from the city's property, it throws a little curveball in the pie. And you have to have the funds to mitigate that immediately. So you're gonna have unforeseen expenses, hopefully not often. But most often when districts have a fund balance, at this time of the year is when you talk about, do we need to purchase a bus? Well, we've gotten 4 buses through grants. At some point, the grants are gonna dry up. Hopefully not for a while. We still have 2 buses that we can target to hit grants if they come back out. But this is when you buy buses. When I moved here, you had 2 buses on the chart to buy and you didn't buy them. Well, at that point, it was a good move because we were able to get grants and replace out. But that's not gonna be there forever.
Yeah, I'm just want to be as clear as I can with respect to this, this account for economic uncertainties. And for me, it is exactly for that. I look at it as a fund that it allows us to have time to make adjustments when the economy does take a significant dip and stays that way for a couple of years. It buys us the time to be able to make the adjustments to our budget that allow us to not run into trouble. So, yeah, it's nice that we don't have to theoretically worry about, the big boiler problem or the massive roof issue or things like that. Clearly, it's there for those things as well. But I look at it more of a long-term kind of a thing that is something that we should maintain so that if something significant that does occur, we don't find ourselves behind the 8 ball.
I agree, and I would say now is also a good time to have the conversation because of exactly what you just said, which is to maintain it. We're in a position where this is the neighborhood we're already in terms of our fund balance. We're not in a position where we're trying to climb out of a hole and achieve or attain a 2-month reserve. We have been operating in this way out of prudence and knowing that this is a healthy way to maintain a budget. And this just codifies that into policy and helps guide us for the future, but it really would not be actively changing what's already happening for us at the moment.
Okay, I have a question, Nikki. When you kept saying maintenance, and I know maintenance can come and go, and like you mentioned buses and diesel tanks or whatever, and that category that I used to see on your annual report was deferred maintenance, and I can't find that part, but that's where you would put that extra money if we had these problems.
Well, we have multiple areas that we would refer to when we're talking about maintenance. So you mentioned vehicles, so obviously that's kind of a separate part of the budget. Vehicle maintenance is something that we do also deal with. In terms of facility maintenance, we have routine restricted maintenance, which is where the majority of our just general activities related to maintenance are happening. So, somebody puts in a work order because something's not working at a school site, the maintenance department responds, they buy the appropriate supplies, they fix it. That's our routine restricted maintenance account. Deferred maintenance typically is when a district is putting money away to work towards, having future projects already funded when you get to the point of needing to do larger projects. So that would be things like the roofs and such. So bigger projects. And in our district, that has been an area of concern, frankly. We have not had a large deferred maintenance fund. We have a small deferred maintenance fund that sits on the restricted side of the budget. But I would like to see us in the future consider opening a separate fund for deferred maintenance planning and either developing a schedule for making deposits into that fund or being able to have an assessment like at the end of the year if we feel like we're in a good position to make a transfer into it. Mark and I have talked about sort of the timeline. If you look at, we've got the bond, and that's awesome, and it's getting a lot of stuff taken care of. And we will have, hopefully opportunities over the next decade or so with that bond to do other issuances if the board, decides that's appropriate. But we should be thinking even longer term and looking beyond that. So when we don't have bond funds, what will the district do for those types of projects? It's like an ever-evolving cycle, and we catch up on a lot of things, but there will always be things in the future. And so deferred maintenance, I will say also, Diane, I'm not sure if this maybe answers your question more. In the past, we received funding for deferred maintenance from the state. And so it would be identified in our reports as a separate funding source, and that is no longer the case. It is expected that districts fund those types of projects with our LCFF dollars.
Okay, because it used to be in a column that said deferred maintenance, and I don't see that anymore, so it's somewhere else. You put it,
The LCAP
it's been renamed. Okay.
And one of the things.
Yeah, we have identified, as Mark said, LCAP. So we have also identified in our supplemental concentration grant funds within our LCAP plan. We have identified facilities as one of our actions. So that's another place you may see it referenced.
Okay.
Essentially, our deferred maintenance that you're referring to is a $200,000 line item in LCAP.
Okay.
And we have used that every single year and then some.
Mm-hmm.
What Nikki's talking about is, for example, with your bond issue.
Earmarking certain funds.
Yeah, you have about a 12-year window of funding
Right.
now with your bond.
I get that part. I was
And
just
so-
wondering what happened with
But in between
that.
draws, if you're on a project, you're gonna need cash to continue. And so having a designated, they call it designated fund balances. So if you have a designated fund balance for deferred maintenance or maintenance, that's where you go to use that fund.
Right.
My previous district, I built a turf field and an all-weather track. Well, in 12 to 15 years, you replace the turf. Every year, we would put in $40,000 in deferred maintenance fund to replace that turf 14 years from now. It was just it was a normal function of our budget, so when that big ticket comes up, there was no surprise about, oh my God, where are we gonna get the money for this year?
Right, that's not an uncommon process, especially when working with vehicles, as an example.
Right.
Yeah.
You can look at, say you've got a vehicle that's got an expected lifespan of, say, 8 years. You take what you anticipate the cost of that vehicle in 8 years, divided by 8, and that's how much money you put into that account each year to offset what that expense might be.
I'm sure Novato, the city of Novato had that for fire trucks.
Yes.
Because you have to. I mean, we're 200,000 for a bus, a fire truck must be 400.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the fight that occurs is you have that designated fund for vehicle replacement, And then you also have that, that fund for economic uncertainties. And when we sit down and battle out the issue with over raises and benefits and things like that between labor and management, everybody has a tendency to look at those two different funds very differently. So, and it's just one of those things from a philosophical standpoint. People need to come to grips with the idea that, you know, those buses will sooner or later need to be replaced, and there's no guarantee that there will be bonds, or I should say, or grants rather. And the same thing with so many other things. So you still have to, make your best judgment and move forward is really what it boils down to, and there's no absolutes in either of them.
And that would be another good reason to use the accounting mechanism of establishing a separate fund for those items, because it just creates more clarity, I think, when you're looking at your general fund reports, which I think is where we sort of spend most of our time. Then you don't have that sort of muddying the waters.
Okay.
However, I have some concerns with all of this. Our district used to always run 3% reserves because that's what the state required. Then a few years back, we got up to 6, a few meaning about 7 or 8 years ago. The district got up to a pretty standard 6%. And what we're talking about in money is a little over $600,000 for the 3%. It was close to $1,300,000 for the 6%. And now at a 17% or whatever, we're at right around $4 million. In my mind, that's an awful lot of money that has come off the backs of people who have really worked in this district, people who have tried teaching kids with very little supplies. And even though a lot of those people and those children are no longer in our district, the effects of that still lingers. Okay, so my concern is that when that money was lost, so to speak, when we were allowed to even go to 1% but did not, it was because the whole state was having issues. The governor came in and chose to say, okay, listen, I'll take care of you, give me a few years. And then instead of needing his whole 8-year projection, he took care of the districts, in particular ours, in less than 4. Then with cost of living increases and things like that, we're now up to $4 million or a 17% reserve, which I calculated at 15, but 15 or 17, they're one and the same. The thing that concerns me so much is that we had a whole district full of employees, and understand I'm excluding the administration at this point, that never got any increases to their salaries, no increases to their benefits. As a matter of fact, their benefit packages have cost them more money and given them less benefits. And we've always had this kind of out loud attitude that says, gosh, employees should make a whole lot more money, but we just don't have any. Well, the more I look at this and the more I watch how just in the last about 6 years, it managed to jump from a stable 6%, because it wasn't always before that, to double, then that means we have some ongoing monies coming into the district that definitely needs to be considered to be budgeted for health and welfare benefits for the people that work here, in particular the two, our two working bodies, CSEA and WTA. And then I really think with all the help coming from the bond, with all the separate little budgets we have going, should push come to shove and our state run into some major problems, the heads of our state will make sure that even if you have to borrow and even if you pay some interest, which seemed to be a misunderstanding from before, you will stay solvable or whatever, solvent, there you go, I knew that was a word, thank you, that could be taken care of in a district like ours. I have issues with thinking that, oh no, our cafeteria ended up costing $800,000 or $600,000 that no one expected it to cost. For whatever reasons, I can't say they were somebody's fault, but I can definitely say that was a cost. The first year we heard about it, it was like $400,000, and then it went up, and then it went up, and this year it's supposed to be coming down. That has to come out of somewhere. Okay, we figure it comes out of economic uncertainties. But if there are all these budgets, then it must come out of them because economic uncertainties stays at the percentage that it's at. And that's where my concern comes from. If it can maintain itself most of the year, other than the need for occasional cash flow, which wasn't even an issue the last time we thought it would be, it ended up working itself out. And that's to the good of everybody who worked it out. That's certainly not a complaint. It just goes to show that, gee, that pot may just find itself better spent or better.
Oh, Paula, can I respond to some of this?
Yes.
I have really big concerns about the fact that we're discussing a pot of one-time funds in the context of ongoing expenses.
No, we're discussing them not as a one-time fund that goes into ongoing expenses, but in a one-time fund that stays for things like cash flow that we may or may not need and frees up the ongoing expenses for other things. It's not really like I have $100 sitting here and I'm not allowed to touch it because I might need it later. It's more like there's $100 here and there's $100 there. And so I want the money that just showed up, thank you, Governor, or whatever. And you can sit here for when I need you, not like it's sitting in a bank doing nothing, but being pulled out and returned and pulled out and returned. And then this money I can spend on negotiations and things like that, that improve our.
Either way, they're one time. We get them one time. So if you're talking about the COVID funds versus you're talking about the fund balance, either way it's one time. And then the discussion being regarding using those to support ongoing expenses is not sustainable. And regardless, we do not have the authority to take restricted funds and to place them into our general fund for unrestricted use. So if they give us one-time funds for COVID, they come with a lot of strings attached. I mean, I have spent this year working pretty hard trying to keep track of a lot of different pots of those COVID funds, and they all have different rules, different timelines, different reports. We can't take those and just free them up for the use of negotiations. It's not
No, and
legal.
negotiations might not be the best example, but they certainly can be used, or at least my understanding is that they are usable when they come and for the things they are earmarked for, as opposed to our using the general fund to pay for things we need right this minute. And that's good, but then at least the replacement fund goes to
But
replace.
I think maybe what I'm hearing maybe is that you're saying, like, we should be strategic with those one-time funds to support costs that we know we have in order to alleviate pressure from those other unrestricted funds to allow them to be used in other ways. Is that?
That's
and
pretty
that-
much, that's pretty much, well, to be honest, that's pretty much what I thought we already did. But
Yes, I mean, we've been trying to be very conscientious so that we use those COVID funds to position ourselves the best that we can as we go through this and as we exit, hopefully, and come out of this situation. And so we are trying to be as strategic as we can. But that still leaves us in the position that whatever funds get sort of relieved, so to speak, or if we use those in place of an unrestricted dollar, that still just leaves those unrestricted dollars there to be used one time, is what I want to emphasize.
So for the last 5 years of me being here, here's the major problem with school funding in California. the governors and the legislatures are always playing reindeer games with money. Oh, well, we're gonna give you money for this, and it can be spent on this. The best example, COVID's the best example. If they really wanted to help every school fairly, take all the COVID money and buy down the PERS and STIRS cost.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Every single district would benefit totally equally without exception. Charters, public, everybody. Everybody would benefit from that. But they don't do that. They make a choice to say, well, we're gonna give you this money and you have to spend it on extended learning opportunities and you have to spend it by the end of this year. That's the problem with funding in California, because there's only two things they can do that really work well. Buy down PERS and STIRS, or up what they give you in ADA per student. They don't do either one of them. And when they don't, now you have all these earmarked funds that come in as one-time funds, because Jerry Brown liked this program, so we want to fund this. Newsom wants to fund this. Now we get this government influx of money for COVID. Oh, but it can't go to just reduce your cost. It has to go for this program or that program.
And the big plus with that is that everything you can think of that is COVID related, let's say,
Right.
is what you can pay for with those COVID funds. Meaning the things you were paying for with general ed funds no longer need to be paid with that, and can go into how it's gonna happen with retirement or increases or welfare and health benefits, or any, especially premiums and things like that.
I wish that were true.
Well-
But what happens is, they put in there, you cannot supplant what you have.
You're right.
So we're constantly reinventing all this stuff and expenditures and how to use it. It doesn't free up general fund money.
But we buy computers and one-time things, books, curriculum, all
Sure.
sorts of stuff, out of our general fund. And when we're lucky, we try to do it in a 7-year cycle, or I think maybe even be
We bought
5 year.
we bought a ton out of the COVID money.
Yeah, and that was
One-time
really
money.
nice. One-time money, just, it can sit there until, isn't it, December or next January or
Yeah,
something?
all the
Okay.
funds have different timelines.
Well, okay, so
We
you
try
could pick.
really hard to make expenditures of one-time funds and restricted funds first,
That's, I know, that's what I have always
which
believed.
provides us with the opportunity to be able to utilize unrestricted funds even for things like that were purchased with restricted funds. Well, it gives us more opportunities for them. But I think I have a better way to bring this into some clarity for you. If we take a look back to last February, when right after COVID really started raising its ugly head, and the governor came out with his projected education budget.
Uh-huh.
In February, he proposed cutting our current budget over 7%. 7% of a budget that had already been approved, okay? The budget that is coming up for this next budget year, he was gonna cut us an additional 13%. So my point I'm trying to get at is if those economic uncertainties had actually occurred, which fortunately they didn't, then we would be in a huge world of hurt, even with the fund balance that we had going into it.
Yeah, you'd have been in the hole about 4 to 5%.
And way more than that. The point I'm trying to get at,
12.
what I'm trying to get at here is, they were going to cut our budget, our current budget, the budget that we had already approved, the
Uh-huh.
budget that the state had already promised us, they were gonna cut that budget over 7%, and then the following year, the year that's coming up, they were gonna cut it at 13%. My point I'm trying to get at here is, the fund balance that we had in place at the time would have given us time to make adjustments, and if the second cut had actually occurred, even our fund balance wouldn't have even been close enough to deal with that, or we'd have had very severe problems. More importantly, that cut of 7% would happen in a year when we've already committed to all those salaries and benefits. There's no rolling back. We can't turn back on those contracts and turn to the teachers and go, oh, by the way, they just cut us 7%, we're cutting you 7%. It doesn't work that way.
Well, be careful, because we've been down that path. And we gave up days and percentages 2.5 or so a few years back, and it took us 4 years to recoup just to be at the bottom where we started. The government didn't do that, which was fortunate, but even if they had, it would not have only been Willits that would have been in the hole. We would have done really nicely for the first 5% you want to talk about. We'd been about 3 or 4%, because I don't think it would have made it all the way to 5, but I'll recalculate. It was something that, yeah, we'd still be in the hole. But when those deficits come, you do like everyone else who has to do things like that. You get a form of credit, a line of credit, which Nikki explained to us once before couldn't happen because everyone would want it. Well, then everyone would get their little part, and the state would see, gosh, that's not gonna work out. That's how we used to do things, or at least were threatened about things. I think you were just starting on the board when people would say, well, we'll just have to give the district back to the state. You won't like that. Well, you know, if that's what you had to do, that's what you had to do. And we knew various districts very close to Willits that did go back to the state. And the ones who felt the crunch the worst was not the standard running of the district.
So
It was the board members. and
let's
the
turn this
district.
around a little differently. Nikki, are we the only district out there that's looking at a 17 or 15, 17% fund balance?
Can I speak up? The average unified school district in the state of California has a reserve for economic insecurity, uncertainty of 18.82%. And the average elementary school district has 22.70%, and the average high school district has 17.34%. The 3%, which is the minimum, is only 9 days worth of operating expenses. And so the 6% that Paul is talking about would only be 18 days worth of operating expenses. And so the average school district in the state of California has about 18% of reserve funds for economic uncertainty. I was reading something from Cal Matters, which talks about issues in California, and it said that the Independent Legislative Analyst Office released a report that found Newsom is proposing a level of ongoing spending the state can't afford under current revenue estimates. So, you know, there's always a chance for economic problems, and we have to be responsible. 18% is about two months worth of operating expenses, and
We're talking averages.
right.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I just interrupted you. Please
You did.
finish and then I'll.
That's okay. Anyway, I think it's the responsible thing to do. I know that the Government Finance Officers Association recommends 17% of expenditures for which would cover for 2 months. And so anyway, I just wanted to bring that up, so.
Well, if I could, I need you to understand, an average, as I honestly trust you understand, takes from the very highest and the very lowest, and then comes to a middle,
Right.
depending upon how many districts we're talking about. When you have districts as wealthy as some of the districts even close to us, let alone in other parts of our state, it's really easy for someone to have a $100 reserve and someone else to have a $1 reserve. It's gonna make us all look like we have $50. That's a really tough one for me to deal with, just because it's so easily cited or slighted.
But the
One
GAO
side.
also recommends a 2-month reserve.
And that's nice, so long as you have all your other things in order. And we don't seem to. We were really fortunate to pull a second bond. It amazed me, as we all know. And certainly, that was $4 million right then. And it was tough looking at a $4 million bond that the town is gonna pay for however long it takes them to pay it off, and it is a 12-year event. When you look to the other side in the budget and you say, holy cow, there's a $4 million reserve right there. I could never think in my mind of knocking it down to 0, But I could think that half of it will get us through most emergencies that are gonna befall our district with enough time to secure the help or whatever we're gonna require financially to fix whatever else comes along. I don't believe it's super necessary for us as a district to be at the top of the mark when we have so many things that could use a little assistance that money could do for us and still maintain a reasonable balance where we will be able to sleep. We will be able at least to cover a 1 month expenditure. And I just think 17 is way too high when our kids still need things now and our employees are having a lot of trouble making a living wage, even if you made the new lowest wage or the lowest wage, basically, that $15 an hour, the regular, since most of our classified employees don't get much more than that.
I don't think.
So Paula, I feel like there was a statement made earlier that we have not done any settlements or done anything toward salary schedules or benefits, and we've done both changes to salary schedules and the benefit contribution in the time since I've been here. And I think it's pretty difficult for me to have this conversation when I feel like our end goal, I think, is the same. We want to be in a position where we can meet all of our needs and do the right thing for students and employees. And we have to be in a healthy fiscal position in order to do that. And I don't think right now the recommendation that's coming to the board is that we continue growing a fund balance indefinitely. In fact, we're just putting in place the policy to match a healthy recommendation for a fund balance, and then we leave it at that. We're not trying to grow it and grow it and grow it, and it's one pot of money that you're saying could be used to do all these other things, but I would like to point out it has done many things for us already. It helped us get through this whole year without having to borrow cash, which would have cost us money. That would have been an additional expense on our books just to be able to pay our salary and benefits, because when the state experiences distress, I'm gonna have to disagree with you on the perspective of feeling that they will step up and save us. I don't feel confident that we should use that as our strategy. I've personally witnessed them deferring cash payments to districts and expecting districts to find the solution to that. I've seen them do, as Alex stated, literally mid-year trigger cuts. I mean, this happened during the last recession, and our district during that time, if you recall, was that was a turbulent experience for any of us who were here for that time. And we had to do tons of budget reduction meetings, tons of layoffs. It was very difficult for employees. And that was because the state used that as their strategy to balance their budget, not that they were trying to save us during that moment. And I believe we really need to be in a position where we can weather those situations without hoping that something will come through and putting our employees through the turmoil of experiencing that kind of a close budget situation. You know, our monthly salary and benefits is over $1 million just for 1 month. And so when we look at $4 million being very, very high, in the context of what a month of operation for us is, it's really not.
Well, really, Nikki, I'm real saddened that you would think that this is personal or whatever. I'm in no way doubting your skills or ability. It is definitely a difference in philosophy. There are lots of things that money is spent on in this district that if we didn't have the lumps of money that we have, would undoubtedly be reconsidered, the monies, before we spent them on those specific or particular areas within the budget. Mistakes that cost thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars wouldn't happen 2 or 3 years in a row. Those kinds of things are not standard, but our reserve has grown given those events in the last 3 to 5 years, which is nice. I mean, I don't see that as bad. Boy,
You're
Mark, you
welcome.
saved
You're
us money.
welcome.
Well, thank you, and so am I saying it. But the important thing is to say I believe in a particular percentage of money to be held pretty much like gold or super important for the reserve account or the economic uncertainties or whatever title we give that fund is a good idea. I'm just thinking, for my way of thinking, for my way of having watched this budget for years and years, 17% is too high at this point in time. And the only way it got that high was making sure other things didn't get taken care of. And I don't think that doesn't make sense. I mean, that's pretty clear. We were all here during the trauma of what happened, meetings and months of people saying, well, you'll all have to take a 5% cut, or we're laying off 4 teachers. And these departments will no longer exist, and this and that and the other. But as soon as some of the money came back, some departments were beefed right up there, and other departments are still lagging behind. Some salaries were fixed and accommodated. Others are still very, very far behind. It's a matter of looking at it.
Yeah, and I know the salary you're talking about. It's
So do
the
I.
top level of the CSEA group. It's the longevity piece.
Well, that's
The
part of it.
state, no, I know that's what it is, but they also enforced a $15 an hour minimum wage
Yes,
we had
they
to
did.
address.
Mhm.
We used the amount of money we had available to take care of that $15 an hour, knowing, and it was said at the table, it's at the table, it's not going anywhere, that the next time we come back to the table, all of the focus has to be to the right side, not the left. We know that.
But we're waiting 3 years to go back
No.
to the table, right?
No.
Good.
After next year, you go back to the table. Contracts are in place for next year, so you're gonna be starting in January, February, whenever. But the reality is, if the state would have given us money we had discretion over, that wouldn't have existed, because we could have made choices there. Because they don't give you discretionary funds, you can't make choices where you don't have money to spend it. As I said again, this craziness of everything being earmarked and we'll give you money, but you gotta do this and you can't supplant what you have, because apparently what we have is no good, you can't supplant it. The other issue is when you talk about average is super legitimate. We like the average test score, I'll take the average state test score. We like them then. There are not many districts that are basic aid. In fact, the vast majority of basic aid districts are small districts because it's the mechanics of how much is your property worth compared to how many kids you have. So if you have 10,000 kids in your district, you'd have to have some really super high property values. So there's only one district in our county basic aid, it's Mendocino, because there are 400 kids on the ocean. The other one is St. Helena, who has an anomaly, it's Napa Valley. But the vast majority of districts in the state of California are not basic aid. It's not like it's 50-50.
No, and that's why you
I mean, the
can't use
basic
that
aid
number.
districts are about that many. Everybody else is in reality.
Mhm.
And yeah, there's some districts, St. Helena's obnoxious. They ought to take the money from St. Helena and spread it to all the counties.
And there's a number of ways to look at that
Yeah,
stuff. I
but
agree with that.
that's not gonna happen.
No.
But it still boils down to is, the fund balance that we're talking about is not money that would be available for salaries and benefits. And the reason why is because it is not an ongoing, it's not money that comes in and gets replenished constantly. It's not a revenue source that can be relied upon. This is a fund balance that's there simply to allow us to weather those economic uncertainties, just like what the state was talking about doing to us this year, unfortunately didn't. we are, and some of the cost money and things like that are helping to prop up this particular budget so that we can possibly do this and set this fund balance level. I just, there's no doubt in my mind that doing something like this and maintaining that fund balance moving forward as best we can will pay dividends for the district in the future. At the very least, it can keep us from having to borrow money and waste money on interest and things like that. But it still boils down
So
to,
what is the interest rate right now? Isn't it at like 2.3 or something?
I have no idea what it would be for borrowing money on those short kind of terms. Nikki might have a better answer.
My understanding is it's quite low, and the worry for it is.
It's not something I have off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, well,
And I think what you really need to look down the road at is, if you set a limit for your fund balance, then exactly what you're talking about comes into play. Anything over that, why are we not spending it on this?
Exactly.
Because right now, you have no policy. You could have a 30% fund balance. You could be St. Helena and have a 50% fund balance.
And Paula, that's part of the reason why I asked at the outset, how do we actually budget money in all these various accounts? I don't want to have a 17% fund for economic uncertainties and then have it basically duplicated throughout the rest of the budget in small increments in every account. I want those things, I want us to be budgeting as close to our actual expected expenditures as we possibly can. And then anything that goes over that, obviously they trade between those accounts, but then they pull from that economic uncertainty fund balance to balance those at the end of the year. And then we work on figuring out how to repay that fund balance in addition to continuing forward with all of our expenses.
and that's exactly what I agree with, except for my way of thinking, 17% is too high. For now, at any rate, it is way too high.
We'll have to agree to disagree.
And that's fine, you know, but it is an issue that, in my way of thinking, you change that 17 to 10, you put that 7% back into where it can be spent. And every year you maintain your 2 or 3 or maybe 5% max of an increase in each of the little budgets for their emergencies. And you think about maybe going from 10 to 11 long-term, 12 long-term. But you maintain for the people who are putting out the effort now, the benefits of what the state is trying to give them. I just don't think differently than that.
Nikki, we're not gonna agree on the number, the percent
Okay.
number, but from your perspective, you would be far better off to vote for a board policy that sets a number than have an unlimited one.
And I'm not
And-
arguing
and
that we don't make
The
a
reason I'm
policy.
telling you that is that over the next 2 years, we have a boatload of COVID money coming. The ESSER 3 money's a lot of money, it's $3 million in the
Yeah.
district.
Mhm.
So if you have a set policy that says 17, if you get to 18 or 19, which is possible, you have a legitimate argument about why is that 2% not somewhere else?
Exactly.
But my advice, set a limit, so you at least have one to start with.
Well, and I sort
Nikki,
of
where are we
thought
right
I was
now?
working on
I
that.
know. You just want to hear it.
Yeah, that's right.
Nikki, where are we right now with fund balance?
I believe so at second interim, we were at about 18.5%.
Did I make my point?
Okay.
Okay. And the other part that concerns me with this is, although I do definitely agree that when you give one cluster a 10% increase, you find the funds to make sure they all get one. I do have issues with other salary schedules, as we've sort of
Yeah.
discussed, in this district. And I think that the money that we're gonna find is going to fix those.
I hope so,
We'll
because
see.
I've tried multiple times to do exactly what we're talking about.
Exactly.
The 5-year span, 3-year span.
Those, and certainly our administrative salary schedule is not okay. I truly believe that. And in case
You
you're.
don't pay the superintendent way even close to what they're worth.
Oh, you know, and as soon as we fix that, the middle school principal will make more than the elementary ones. Look at that.
I
So-
know,
That's a
and I
big-
have a formula for you, and it's
Okay.
something.
Can I bring us back on task?
No,
Yeah.
no.
Sorry.
Can I, Can I make one final comment on this? I guess I would like to say, I sort of see this as really being two separate issues, two separate conversations. And I look at the conversation of how do we prioritize our budget? How do we prioritize our needs on an annual, on an ongoing basis? That is one conversation, and I think that's more what I'm hearing a desire to discuss. Those things cannot be implemented by tapping into, part of the reserve one time. That's not gonna help you meet your priorities over the long term. So I really look at that as as Mark said, we set a percentage. It creates a lot of clarity about what that is. Then there's no discussion to have. And you have a really strong idea of what you're working with to set your priorities. And then that is the conversation at that point, is how do we prioritize as a district?
One of the things, Alex, that boards do is when they have a policy like that, so let's say it's 17, let's say you have a rough economic year, the state doesn't give you, and you drop down to 14. Most school boards put a plan in place to get back to their base.
Correct.
And so that's the value of setting a number. It gives everybody the same target. It gives you a plan. If everything goes to hell financially in California and you drop down to 10% as a fund balance, you should be putting together a plan of what are we gonna do, incremental steps, how many years, how you're gonna get back to where you should be. That's a plan.
So this has been put to us in the form of a draft policy, is that correct?
Yes.
So yes, we just brought this forward as a discussion item. It is not yet a first reading. We would probably like to hear back on direction as to moving forward with a first reading. And I'm wondering also, the draft you're looking at includes the percentage, but does not include the language I referred to earlier, which I think is something that would be valuable to us to include a statement that says if we have one-time funds over like a $200,000 amount that we're spending, that we would exclude that from the calculation so as to not artificially inflate the fund balance in a given year. It would create, I think, a better year-over-year stability when you look at that, the fund.
Okay, I agree. Is that something that you have access to for modifying this policy?
Yeah, we can include that when we bring first reading.
Okay. Does the board have a preference with respect to the percentage amount, or do we want to debate that more when we have it at a first read?
Personally, the percentage is fine with me. Quite honestly, I've been in districts who fortunately, we had I think we had 22, 23% there, and when that recession hit, we were able to weather the storm and keep the cuts away from the classroom and maintain sports and music programs where other districts around us were going belly up. Now, I know that wasn't from just this uncertainty money. However, it did give us time to plan and to pay people, not have to borrow the money right away, and to get things in place so that we are able to meet our financial obligations and not hurt the children and their programs and their learning. So personally, from what I've seen, and it's not if California goes sideways again, it's when, because California is going to go sideways again, and it could be pretty bad. That pendulum swings far and wide in California. But personally, I mean, I prefer 21%, but 17% works for me.
If we roll the clock back to the last recession, we did not have a fund balance that came anywhere close to what we did have.
Yeah.
And the result was massive layoffs and massive changes to programs, and still each board meeting, we were struggling to find ways to stay above that 3% margin that was gonna trigger really bad things for us. And I don't ever wanna see us there again. And quite frankly, I don't know that 17% would be the ideal number, but it seems like since we have a recommendation from the GAO and it's right in the average with the rest of the state, I'm comfortable with 17% as a starting point.
Now, this is apart from writing the policy, or you mean written onto the policy?
When we have a first read, it'll be included in the first read policy. That doesn't stop us from making changes to that
Changes at
first
that
read.
time.
So, from a direction, my position is we should direct Nikki to add that clause with respect to one-time funds so that they don't get calculated. In other words, if we got $1 million in one-time funds, that skews that 17% significantly higher. We don't need that. Those one-time funds, like Nikki says, should not be in that calculus.
I'm curious where Diane is, because all of you have kind of chimed in. Diane asked some questions early on. But
the other thing is I'd like to see is, and I read this and I don't recall seeing it, but is there does this policy speak to a plan for replenishing that reserve after you've utilized it?
It does not, and we talked about whether or not to include that. Ultimately, I think, Mark, tell me if you agree with this, but my thought here is that if you have a situation where you're going below that amount, then that's obviously gonna be a discussion that happens at the time, and the board would have an opportunity to set a timeline, and create targets at that point. It would be hard to know. It's like, what circumstance would bring the district to that point? It could be a lot of different things. And so therefore, I think the timeline could look different depending on the situation. It seems better to me to allow that flexibility to the board to deal on a case-by-case basis.
the policy should really say, the board will set a plan to do that, not by this date. Because there's a difference between a $5 million balloon on a bond that tanked you. There's a difference between property values tanking, and there's a difference between COVID, which is a window that you can see out of now. There's a difference between all those financial setbacks, and those, you can't have a policy for those. You just have a policy that says if you go below 17, it requires the board to meet and convene and figure out a plan to reestablish it back to that level. That's about as deep as you want to go.
It sounds very reasonable. Okay. So, from my perspective, we need to add that language that Nikki's talking about with the one-time funds to this and bring it back to the next board meeting as a first read.
Did you put a number, like Nikki has commented it'd be $200,000, and you've talked about $1 million. Is there a real number going in there about should we receive X amount of money or more as a one-time thing? Or are we just going to have language that says should additional one-time money show up, leaving it to any amount?
I think
My
you're
concern
chasing your
with
tail
that-
over 50,000 in a $20 million budget doesn't make sense.
So
But-
you're
Right, so my concern is we do receive a lot of just very miscellaneous one-time funds. I mean, you could even look at, if we receive a $500 donation into a little program, at a school site, that's a one-time fund. It would be extremely difficult and cumbersome for me to do the accounting to exclude those types of things every time I do this calculation, and would likely be immaterial to the reserve balance. So 200,000 was the amount that we talked about being from any single source, where when you start getting over that level, that's where you're gonna start to see it more of a material impact to your reserve amount.
In reality numbers for you, Paula, in the district, you can almost in our district equate a 1% increase with $100,000. They they kind of go hand in hand based on our budget. And so that would give you a mindset of if you got $200,000, you should have a conversation about it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I mean, $200,000 potentially has an impact on a 17% fund balance of $34,000.
Right. Exactly.
So,
Diane, where are you at? You're the only one who's kind of, you've been listening nicely, you've
I've been listening. The other thing is I'm looking at it as my credit score. That it should be 15 or 17%, because that's what you want on a credit score instead of a 3%, you know.
and that does have impact.
I know.
Impact,
It just impacted our bond.
yes,
Right.
exactly.
When you were mentioning that, and you said we needed a 2-month,
Right.
or what was it, how much money was going out in those 2 months?
It
And that
impacted
was
our rating
15
on our
to-
bond.
And our rating, if we were higher up, we get a better a lower interest for that.
And it doesn't impact the district per se, but it impacts all the property owners that are
Yes.
paying the
Right,
bill.
that's the other thing. So that's where I'm looking at 15 to 17%, yeah.
I think you've got your marching orders there, Nikki.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for all your hard work.
No problem, and thank you, Jeannie. I know, so you had sent some great questions that helped, further the thoughts around the one-time fund, so I appreciate that.
Okay, so we are at item C, discussion of District K3 Reading Initiative. And I'll start off with, this was something we started a couple of months ago, and started with a conversation with Ms. King, and the idea was to try and find out what resources and programs, personnel, basically call it what resources we need to put in place to make sure that the vast majority of our kids, K3 or K5, are at grade level as they move through K3, K5, and Kathleen Crossman has been kind of heading up that charge. I know Nancy Runberg's been involved with it as well. A host of retired teachers and have been involved, as well as a growing number of teachers and administrators, as well as board members throughout the district have been getting more and more involved with this process as it's been moving forward. I've been trying to take a back seat to this process with providing the only direction that I want to see them develop a program that will have an impact, produce results, and I simply, from a board perspective, I simply need to know what you need to make this happen, and then we will work as a board to try and find those resources. So I believe, is Kathleen here?
Michelle, is she on?
I see a K up there.
I don't, it's over there.
There she is.
I'm here.
There
She is. So I'd like to turn it over to Kathleen, and she can kind of give us kind of an update on where we stand with this at this point in time. I know that there's a draft proposal that's been circulated. I know you sent something out today. I haven't had a chance to research or review it yet, but I know there's been some updates to that. So I'm interested in finding out where we stand.
All right, well, thank you, Alex. Since last time we talked at the last board meeting, the two programs that we were considering had been narrowed down to one, and we've done a lot of research and met with publishers, looked over the programs. One teacher actually tried it out in her class for a week, and just have narrowed it down to the program that we currently have, which is Benchmark. However, it's been redone, and very well redone, so I'm pretty excited about it, and the teachers are too, and a lot of the retired people have weighed in and feel very strongly about it as well.
Can you talk a little bit about what some of the recommendations are on that proposal, that initial proposal, or if any significant changes to that?
Oh, sure. Let me bring that up.
I want to also point out that the request has gone out district-wide that for anyone and everyone that feels they have they can make a contribution to this process, to please get involved. Your opportunity to have a voice here, something that that the teachers have expressed an interest in multiple times over the years. We are reaching out to you to get involved. If you have an interest, please get involved. We are genuinely interested in making an impact here, and hopefully it will pay dividends for years to come. But we certainly want this to be your program that you get behind and you can make successful. So
Can I
thank you.
interject something?
Certainly.
Did I cut you off too?
No.
I'm thinking,
No, you're
I'm
fine.
sorry, okay. A comment that has repeatedly come to me, and I know this is unintentional by any of the board or administration that invented these time slots, is that the time slots were especially difficult. 11 o'clock in the morning, you're dealing with students. It's the 90 days of May that will soon turn into the 60 days of June, you know, and it was sort of like the hardest time to ask for input. But everyone I know, figure at least 2 full schools worth out of all 4, have said they super appreciate the opportunity to give input, and they absolutely want to do that. The scare is the timeline. And since all the assessing and all the grading and all the reporting and all the, you know, those, they're not timelines, spreadsheets or whatever are due, it's just been real hard. And the ones I heard from were especially interested in maybe giving them a week or so after school, let's add, to continue giving input. I said I was pretty certain, and I did sort of speak for us, that we're not gonna make a decision tomorrow and say, okay, doesn't matter what you think, you had your chance. But to make sure and give input then, because otherwise it just looks like procrastinating or giving an excuse. But that is a big deal.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Obviously, there's no way that setting that meeting schedule is going to fit everybody's schedule.
No, of course not.
However, we have this wonderful thing called email.
Yeah.
So,
But you have to write them. And if
Yeah.
you're writing report card comments, it gets in the way,
Yeah.
you know, and that's.
but you can also pick up the phone, call Kathleen, call somebody else that's already in part of the, have them be your advocate as well. But because the schedule doesn't fit you, please don't use that as an excuse to not get involved. Use somebody else that's already attending those meetings. Call me, call Paula.
Well, you did call me, and I'm really sorry, I don't write up everything you say. So call Alex, because he'll listen better.
So, but we definitely want your input, and we just want a program that moving forward is successful. And again, I'm not a teacher. I don't make any claims that way. I'm only a board member that's trying to get you the resources that you need to be successful. That's all. Go ahead, Kathleen.
Kathleen, can I just ask you one thing before you go on? It was something that you said before, is that benchmark had been redone. So is it the phonics part of benchmark that had been redone?
Yes, it was the phonics program in
Okay.
Benchmark.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the things that when we first came together that we talked about were literacy coaches to support the teachers. And we were thinking one at Brookside and one at Blosser Lane, and they would help to plan lessons and deliver high quality tier 1 instruction. They would be basically for the teachers, to support the teachers. And then reading specialists are needed to support students. So 2 at Brookside, where the kids are just really beginning to learn to read, and then 1 at Blosser, and they'd be focusing on supporting students not in the initial instruction, but in interventions tier 2, tier 3 instruction. And then they could coordinate the assessments and make sure that instructional guidance to the teachers and the paraeducators is based on the assessment results. And then we talked about dropping class size, and that would be especially at grade 1, where the teachers are really focused on teaching reading. They are in every grade, but grade 1, they really spend the most time there teaching reading. Again, we talked about the tier 1 phonics program. We also talked about working on our supply of materials for our tier 2s and tier 3 interventions. So the kids that are struggling after tier 1 intervention, after tier 1 instruction, the basic instruction in class, what do we have available to help support them? And Benchmark, we found, has a really nice intervention kit as well. So they've redone that, they've completely redone that, and the people who were on the committee really appreciated their intervention kit as well. And we talked about other things like continuing to fund staff collaboration time, which is so immensely important for teachers, for paraeducators, and really allows us to delve into the student data and make great decisions about our instruction and grouping students and things from that data. Social workers, we have heard about a possibility of getting social workers, and we think that that will help the reading too, because it's kind of the wraparound model where all of the needs of the student are met, and so it helps ultimately with the reading. But we also think that the reading specialists and reading coaches are more directly focused on teaching reading. So, and then we just want to make sure that, or we hope that things that are implemented can be sustainable.
Perfect, thank you. Questions for Kathleen?
Kathleen, I appreciate your work. I got a chance to go through it before the meeting, and it's a pretty solid plan. It's a good plan. Thoughts that I have on it is for your tier 2 and tier 3 interventions, especially starting out, you're going to have larger numbers in those 2 tiers than you can really handle with the amount of staffing that you have there. One of the things that I've seen that has worked with that is they would have like one teacher with 2 paras doing small groups, like 3 to 5 kids in each group. And what that did, if you have a program that is very concrete in regards to delivering it, then the intervention teacher can then work with the 2 paras and help guide them to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing with those kids. Yet you can, instead of 5 kids for that 1 hour that you do or half hour that you intervene for them, you have 15 kids that you're intervening for. So that might be a consideration in your discussions is could we put paras, could the paras deliver this curriculum, our intervention curriculum, along with a teacher that can help work with them. So that's just one thought.
Can I just tell you that our paras are amazing, and they do deliver intervention, and they are really, really good. We like to include them in our training so that they are also trained along with the teachers as well. So
Right.
I'm super proud of our paras. They're gangbusters.
And I agree with you. I've seen paras do just some fabulous jobs. The other thing is I make sure that you get the resources for your tier 1, for your teacher strategies and your in the classroom interventions. Because if you nail that down, your tier 2 and tier 3 kids will be a lot less. And I've seen people try to do that in reverse and put all their resources in tier 3 or tier 2. But tier 1, they kind of didn't do anything with it, and it just flooded tier 2 and tier 3, and pretty soon they couldn't hire enough intervention teachers or paras to keep up with the demand. So just a couple thoughts I have, but pretty solid plan. I really appreciate the work you've done.
This team is amazing.
So the initial goal here is to try and have these programs in place in the fall when we all come back, hopefully with far fewer COVID restrictions. I don't know how much of this we will be able to provide by then. Again, we know that it's a draft and it's still being developed, and I hope that anybody, once again, that wants to have a voice in how this thing comes together, gets in there and gets involved. But hopefully some of these elements, if not all of these elements, will be able to be in place when we come back to school in the fall.
So what are you expecting that to look like then? That 3 teachers or 3 reading specialists will already be being hired?
Possibly.
And 2 more of the, coaches, thank you, will be in place, and they'll have all been in service and all of,
I'm hoping that fairly soon, this draft proposal will turn into a final proposal. Once that final proposal is basically given to the board and the superintendent, then we can actually sit down and look at this from a budget standpoint and go, a budget and facility standpoint, and go, what can we actually do with this? Also, given the limited amount of time we have to find personnel, get them trained, get them ready to go, and all that kind of stuff. So at some point very soon, we actually have to sit down and make some hard decisions on how much of this we're actually going to be able to put in play when we come back to school.
Yeah,
Is there a hard line on this? Absolutely not. I would rather take the necessary amount of time to get it right than to rush it. On the other hand, every day that we don't have this in play is another day that we're wasting getting things moving forward.
Okay, well, I do have some issue with, 12 days being the amount of time we're gonna need to implement a program that's costing a great deal of money, and that's just part of it, of the budget that we've been privy to, right? I'm also really concerned about starting a program that we sort of set up to fail, because we can't, well, maybe we can in 12 days decide who, where, what, and when, but
I don't know where the 12 days is coming
well,
from.
that's when school lets out, and you have to, okay, you don't, no one does. I strongly believe that there need to be teachers 100% involved in this setting up. It's gonna look like this after the second week of school. And I have a lot of issue with the idea of thinking, maybe it could or couldn't happen, but thinking, all those teachers want to come back and work those first 3, 4, 6, 8 weeks of the summer to do this with us. And I just sort of said that you don't have to believe me, you can take a poll, but people have had a long year. It's super busy regardless right now anyway, and it just scares me.
There is no good time.
That's what scares me, there's no good time. But if we make it too quickly, I'm afraid they'll just say, yeah, we've been down this path 900 times. If we could say this is going to start with this much stuff the first week of school or the first trimester of school, then okay, I could see a goal like that. It's concrete and you can buy right into it.
A certain portion of it's already moving forward. I know Mark's already been working
Right.
forward with some of it. But again, we don't
In
have.
terms of,
Go ahead.
sorry, I was just gonna say, so for the first year, one of the primary sources of funding that I think we would use is the expanded learning opportunities funding, and that must be fully expended by August 2022. So I think the state's priority is that we begin addressing these needs as quickly as possible.
The single biggest issue is staffing,
Right.
because you're talking about 5 people. Do those 5 people come from internal? If they do, we need 5 teachers in classrooms. If they come external, you post, you take time, you get all the right people. Staffing is your biggest issue. This is one of the rare times that funding isn't the issue.
Right, but there's
And-
another part that's gonna require staffing.
The whole
Staffing and
staff
facilities.
has to be in service on that first part of benchmarks. But it's only the first part of benchmarks. And our teachers have had a really, really good background in phonics. Like or not like unlocking the code, they learned a boatload about phonics. And they know about phonics, they know what it looks like, how you talk about it, what you gotta teach, and how you teach it. Now the issue is using, if they wanna use benchmarks to teach it, that's fine. I think that will be a fairly easy transition because benchmarks didn't put that in their program originally and should have. Now that it's there, they know how to use benchmarks. This is just using the first piece of it. Your big issue is staffing. Because staffing is going, you gotta get quality. We're not talking about just finding another third grade teacher. We're talking about a reading specialist.
with
We're talking
credentials.
about a teacher coach. Those are different. Those are not just somebody who's on ed joint. You gotta have a skill set. So that's your biggest issue. It's not funding. It's not necessarily benchmark. Sure, there has to be staff training.
But once we've actually made the decision to move that direction,
Right.
those decisions, or I should say, that hiring process is ongoing through the summer.
Right.
And
The sooner
hopefully,
Right, the sooner you get teachers' hands on the new stuff from Benchmark, as soon as they get that, they can have it all summer long, use it as their pillow all summer long, and come in and be trained in the fall to really use it well. Because June and July trainings don't work, people aren't gonna be there. It has to be those days in August, we already have them. Those have to be targeted for that instruction. I don't think that's your hurdle. Your hurdle really is getting the staff in place.
And that's exactly what I agree with. And the reason it's such a big deal is because as soon as we finish speaking about the reading program
Right.
that is supposed to be super great with second language learners,
Yep.
then we're gonna throw in the needs for personnel in language acquisition.
That's correct.
Okay, it's gonna be a big problem, and since a lot of the materials that used to exist no longer exist, when it was a lot more hands-on in a classroom program, there are a lot of things that have to be considered, and frankly, I prefer the priority to be somewhere where we've already guaranteed over a year's worth of loss, instead of to a program that will service those who probably have a loss. Because not all of our kids lost education, all right? But all of our students that needed additional assistance with acquiring a language, English in particular, definitely lost. As a matter of fact, most of the situations I've seen, their Spanish got better, which in the long run will be handy, but we need them to come back to school and learn academic language as well as real fluent English that you don't get just by saying this word means this and this is what we're reading today.
right, but that's a separate discussion.
Yeah. but
Except that they go together.
They're tied together. I think after you guys talk about EL, I think you do need to decide a priority.
Well, I just.
Are we gonna jump out of the gate with EL and try and get everything in place first, or are we gonna try and do it with the K-5 reading? But you can try and do both, but you're talking about a lot of staff in a short period of time. And if they come from your existing staff, then you have that enculturation of new people that has to happen. So there has to be a systematic understanding of which one are we gonna target first. Doesn't mean the other one stops. It just means the other one might start January.
Right, I get that.
My
Can
concern, my
Can I
concern
jump
is,
in for a second? I'm sorry, this is Dawn. When you're talking about staffing, I think you have to hit it before June 30th if they're gonna leave another district.
Absolutely.
There is kind of a time limit on hiring people, so if you're gonna do it, you kind of need to open those jobs now, so you can find them. Anyways, I just wanted to jump in there, because that is kind of a hard deadline to keep your credential with you. Anyways.
Yeah, that's why I'm talking about staffing, because there is a time frame.
And you
Once-
need to go back to school over the summer and pick up those little riders if you don't have them already, if we're gonna do this
Right.
the way we're supposed to do it.
Yep.
But my concern is funding this over the long run. That, yes, we have all this extra money coming into the district, but it's all time constrained money, is that it has to be spent by a certain time. And then we're being held harmless right now as far as ADA goes. But then I think at the end of next year, we're no longer held harmless. And so, I mean, there's all these financial things that I can't see. This is very expensive to do, and it's a wonderful thing to do. But over the long run, how are we going to afford this? So,
Well, and I can answer a lot of that. When I do my thing on I call it ELO because of the music group.
Right.
When I do my extended learning thing, I'll address the financial piece of that. And I think where you're gonna be in a 3-year window and how do you sustain it?
because that's a lot of staff.
Yeah,
Well, there's other things to take a look at too, and I discussed this with Kathleen, for example. I'm looking at this as realistically, committing to this K-3 project in its initial form over about a 3-year period. And I would argue that year 1, we should expect some marginal gains, because everybody's learning, things are getting put in place. Year 2, I would expect some significant gains, along with year 3. By the end of year 3, we should be, I would hope, that our tier 2 and tier 3 interventions are dropping off significantly in K3, K5, maybe even a couple of years beyond that, maybe even K6, K7. That would, plus our tier 1 instruction, those people should all be becoming subject matter experts by then, thanks to all the coaching and all the training and the experience that they've hopefully gotten during the 3-year window. My argument would be that at some point we would take a look at how many reading specialists, how many coaches we still need to meet the need. In other words, if our tier 2 and tier 3 interventions have dropped way off because most of our kids are at grade level in those areas, then those costs might start to decrease, I would hope.
And then you have all this extra personnel, and
Some of them stay here and fill other roles, or maybe move on to other places.
well, and the biggest data piece you wanna look at is referrals to special ed. That's where you'll know, are you doing what you need to be doing? Does tier 1, 2, and 3, does tier 1 and 2 work? If tier 1 and 2 work, special ed referrals should go down. If special ed referrals continue to go up, the program wasn't the solution.
Right.
So that's your benchmark as a board. Over the next 3 years, what is your special ed referral rate in K3? Has that gone up or down? That's really where you wanna focus.
Also, training the teachers and your para, our aides, or what, I'm used to that. We did it with the new reading series, not the current one, the one before that, long time ago. But they came Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday was our last one. And what we did was they introduced the first week how we would use the reading program and the first story. And then on Tuesday, we made the lesson plans for that. And in the afternoon, we did the second week and the third week. And we made copies for all the teachers in our grade level and all the supplemental stuff for it. So when when our teachers came with vacation bag, they had this, they were solid when we were going, and they would turn around and say, I found another book that could go with this lesson for the second week, and we all picked it up, and we were adding more stuff. So it was not just the reading, you were gonna get the science part. This was a science, I think it was a camping thing, so the kids ended up cooking s'mores, and some of the teachers brought tents in just to make the reading more fun, and we went that way. So that's the best way to go. I mean, teachers are amazing.
And as a board, you
Yeah.
wanna focus in on referrals to special ed, and you wanna see formative performance assessments about 3 times a year. You know, how are we doing? Did a kid grow 1 year of growth for 1 year of instruction? Regardless of where they started in Diane's room. If she's
Exactly.
4th grade and they're 2nd grade, at the end of the year, the kid should be at least at 3rd grade. You should grow a year of instruction for a year of growth. That's what you want to see the match on. And you can get that from Acadian's testing. And that's an important piece. The teachers need that to see, is it working? What doesn't the child know, or what do they know? What does the whole group not get compared to a few?
And so,
But-
excuse me.
But as a board, those are really the things, you want data.
And so, does that testing, I mean, I don't remember it from, I mean, I remember giving those language fluency tests. but
Teacher doesn't give these, you have a testing team.
The testing team, okay, well, that's
Yeah.
the first plus, but the second in my mind is it gonna pinpoint the areas of deficiency so that those are the ones that are
Yes.
then picked
Yes.
up on in work
Yes.
time?
And that would be
Okay, well, so
terrible.
then is that what's going from K to 5 now?
Hopefully.
And that will be a push of this new reading program though, won't it?
Yeah.
A big part of my concern is if we don't go back and look on what a student needs specifically,
Exactly.
and then recheck to make sure they maintain that knowledge, we get nowhere, and we still have kids that look great coming out of 2nd grade, look terrible coming out of 5th, do great in 7th, and then can't do their chores in 10th.
Well, as you know, I've been hearing
A lot about
exactly
that.
what you're talking about.
I know, and
On a
that's, we
regular
agree.
basis at home.
I know.
And Paula, the state
One
testing
of the
are
teachers.
really irrelevant. When you're talking about K-3 reading, the state test is irrelevant. It's given to 3rd graders at the end of the year, you don't get your data till halfway through 4th
I
grade.
know, it's a little
Half the
disappointing.
water's under the bridge in 4th grade, by the time you get it,
Mhm.
Our
You're not
own
gonna go back and
assessments
fix that.
are what we have to work with there.
We just need to
We
make
have
sure
to
they're
work with
quite
our own assessments.
standardized.
yes, you have to use like
Programs,
things like
standardizes.
Acadian's
Mhm.
testing,
Assessments.
which the district knows how to do.
Okay.
People have been trained how to use it. Teachers know what it means, they know what it looks like, they know what it tells them. And so if you have that in place, you'll know if it's working. Teachers will have data. It's really important. You can't do a program if you don't have set formative assessments 3 times a year to give you benchmark data on a child. Then you're just rolling the dice and hoping everything's gonna go well at the end of 3rd grade.
Right.
When we have that problem, that's what I'm
That's where
concerned.
we're at.
Okay.
Yep.
But I will tell you what, I know you're worried about those positions being there and nothing to do. That's not gonna happen. That's not gonna happen for a number of years, because quite honestly, the first year, when you implement this, you're not gonna be able to get all the kids. You're gonna have to triage the kids and put those in there that need the intervention the most. But the truth is, there's gonna be another batch the next year that need to go through, and a batch after that, I'm sure. It's gonna take several years to get to the point where you will not need an intervention specialist, because it doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah, I
Tier
don't,
2 will look different over the next 3
Yeah,
years. It'll
yeah.
get continually better.
yeah, I don't envision a day when we won't need those intervention specialists, but I envision a day when we may need far fewer.
Yeah. Hopefully.
Any further discussion on K-3 reading initiative? Anybody?
I just wanted to say to Kathleen how much I appreciate, I sat in on some of the sessions and how much I appreciate all the hard work that she has done on this, as well as the participants. They really care about improving kids' reading, and they really put a lot of effort into it. So I just want to say that.
I, like you, I very much appreciate the wide range of input from a wide range of people. People at the high school are involved, people at virtually every one of the sites are involved. And Kathleen's been doing what I would consider to be an excellent job of being the MC on this process, and is keeping the momentum moving forward is really the best way I can put it. So I'm looking forward to having a great product in service, and hopefully we can have it all in play when we start in the fall, if not very shortly thereafter. So, Paula, you're on.
Gosh, Maria or Miriam, I certainly hope you're out there, because I didn't go Monday, and we just had one. Oh, are you jumping up? Good job.
Payroll deduction.
I can give you a little bit of
Yeah.
an update if you want.
Oh, I'd love it. A long one, actually, just because the
Sorry.
parts I know, you can say it instead of me, that's fine.
Okay, so our English Learners Program group, has been using the 2017 guidance from the Department of Education, the roadmap for English learners, which actually reconceptualizes the way that we look at the learning from our English learners, and really looks at them more as multilingual learners. And because we don't have an existing program or data or any sort of something to go by in the district, what we're doing is first looking at the principles. There's 4 principles in this guidance, and we're looking at the principles and the elements within those principles, such things as in Principle 1, the whole idea of students or English learners being not just English learners, but being multilingual learners and valuing their native language and their native culture, and using that as a way to, or as a means to bring them, connect them to what they're learning. But so the group is looking at what we have in place as a starting point for where we want to go with it. Now I believe, and Robert, you can chime in too, but we're looking at sort of a 3-year implementation plan. We're not looking at the next 12 weeks, but there are because there are definitely some things that we need to do differently, or we need to think about it differently. For example, I did this exercise with my staff yesterday in looking at there's a rubric, not a rubric, indicators of these elements in a teacher toolkit. And all of my teachers looked at what we had in place for each one of these indicators in Principle 1 and 2, which are the ones that we are focused on. And it's interesting there are some things in place that we have, and there are some real gaps that we need to address. So far we've been looking at what we have in place and what it would take us to move, or what it would take to move us to further implementation. And when we get to the point where we're looking at where we need to go, I'm sure that most of the administrators on this group will do the same as I did and involve my staff and try to get a perspective of what exactly it is that can be done in the classroom as well as a whole school. Did you have any questions?
I do. Maria, can you
Yes.
tell me what it would look like at Blosser? What does EL look like? So if I were a parent and I said, what are you guys planning to do for my EL child at Blosser? Is there an idea of what it would look like? What's the program look like for
You
my
want
kid?
me to talk about Blosser?
Well,
Okay.
Blosser, Brookside, Bechtel, predominantly, my bigger issue is the younger grades, because
Right.
it's so problematic if we don't deal with it at the younger grades. It just snowballs by the time they hit your building.
Right, and a big emphasis has been the validation of both the culture and the native language. And so building in some of those celebrations that include the celebrations of
the culture, having culturally appropriate instruction for students, using their native language to support their learning of English and furthering their knowledge of their native language as well, so that they're truly multilingual learners. You probably all weren't around when, not everybody, but when we had the old bilingual education that we used to do in California, where we actually took them and taught the students native language, students come to us reading. We don't need to stop their learning until they learn English. We need to continue to teach them their subjects, supporting it with their native language. So at Blosser again, so that's a big part of it, having that culturally appropriate instruction. And another part would be to make sure that we have integrated and designated language development. So the language development that's integrated into every subject, literacy within every subject, and then the English language development that is designated to support, the development of language just in support of other subjects. Does that make sense? So that you're not actually teaching the language within another subject, but you're supporting the learning of science through, say, vocabulary development, that kind of thing. That's kind of what we're looking at.
So this is obviously, I've told you before, this is not my area of expertise. Michigan and Minnesota are not filled with EL students. So I appreciate learning a lot from you guys about this, but I will tell you, it's obvious even for me when magic happens. And I'll use Betty Meineke has picked up an additional section of third graders. She went into the room, was there with the kids. Nancy brought in a newcomer, not just to Blosser, but to the country the first day. And she said in Spanish to the kids, will you make sure that you help this child? They all responded to him in Spanish. He kind of lit up that, oh, I can talk to people. But his Christmas tree got the star lit when Betty turned to him and said, welcome to the class, you're going to really enjoy this in Spanish. I mean, that kid lit up like a Christmas tree. So it really is still that personal connection with the kid and the ability to communicate.
So Maria, what do we?
Yes, and I can also tell you that something that surfaced when we did our little exercises today was that a lot of our material, a lot of our curriculum not a lot of it, some of it, either doesn't have the cultural connection or the English development piece, or teachers need more professional development on how to take those pieces from their curriculum and be able to use them with their English learners in class, which, again, is probably something like a coach or something like a support, professional development support. It doesn't have to be a coach within our district, but I'm just saying that those are the kinds of things, those are the kinds of supports that teachers need to be able to do culturally appropriate teaching and validating of their experiences.
So do we have a plan as to how many people we need to hire at each school site, and what? I mean,
I'm sorry, I can't hear it.
What kind of plans do we have as far as staffing goes for the ELD program?
Yeah, we're not at that point yet. We are just getting through our second principal, and after that we will be looking at how to move forward, or what are some of the things that are coming up as things that we need to move forward with. We are not at that point yet. Would you agree with me, Robert?
Yes, right now we have Molly, and most of you know Molly. and she's been working with the county, and she came in, and her first goal is to take us through these principles. So to understand where we're going, or where we want to go to, or eventually end up at. And so we're having all the discussions about celebrating someone's identity or their bilingual abilities and so forth and so on. That's one part. Then the other part is the instructional curricular part, and you make it accessible to them using all the EL strategies to address that. The other one is the third principle is the leadership resources, assessments, capacity building in your staff. The fourth one is the alignment and articulation across grade levels and across schools. So I mean, it's very comprehensive. So right now, we've only done Principle 1 and Principle 2 with Molly going over it so that we understand it. So at the next one, we're going to finish up Principle 2 and look at 3 and 4. And then the whole, what we're looking at is actually backwards mapping 3 years out. So where do we want to be in 3 years? What are we going to do year 2 and year 1? And so we're kind of going slow to go fast in regards to results in our ELD program, and developing a program that will be sustainable and effective for our EL students. So that's where we're at right now. And there's a lot of PD that's going to be involved with that in regards to teachers using EL strategies in the classroom. And the EL teachers we've had in the past, I mean, the talk has been, okay, maybe they pull some EL students out, but maybe they're also providing PD and helping teachers in the classroom to use EL strategies in the classroom, where that's where that EL student is most of the time, is with that teacher. So they're the ones who have to become proficient at using the EL strategies. But of course, this is all going to take time. It's not going to be done like that. That's why the 3-year plan, and let's intentionally do what we need to do so we're, in 3 years, we're at where we want to be at.
It is, because it's going to take time, because it is a big shift in how we have been thinking about English learner instruction and how they learn. It's a shift. When you really look at what the guidance is saying, it's very different than what we've been doing.
However, we do really need some start, and that start needs to be with teachers being in service on how you address the needs of anybody learning a second language to a point where you're proficient enough to function comfortably and well. And for my way of thinking, that's what's going to need not just a lot of money, but a lot of personnel. Because even though it's really true, your students, the students are in the classroom, and the hope is that any kind of additional assistance also happens in the classroom. There is a lot of strategies that should theoretically, K-5, be used on all of your students. It's language development. And just like when they were 1 year old, you did certain things. Doesn't matter what words came out of your mouth, you still had particular behaviors. And those are what we need to duplicate or reproduce, or in some cases produce for the first time, from our teachers for the students. And it's just, the approach to telling everyone how to do things is not a particularly rapid one that we're using, but the hope is that it gives people a deeper understanding. However, how's it going to look in August or September or whatever? We need really quickly to have that piece. For my way of thinking, it's at least as important as having a reading program set up. Because reading and language are one, basically, just meshed. And if you screw up the gear, you're going to get nowhere really quickly.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but due to the retirement of the ELD teachers at Blosser and the pandemic and all that, we basically don't, like I said, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't have an ELD program in place currently.
We are starting it from scratch and building it back.
Right,
correct.
so we have to have something in place when school starts.
There
Yes.
are some materials, they're just.
Yes, and I think that we will have something in place. I see, I'm not talking about additional personnel, but there may be some, consultation we can have and different, MCOE, other areas, other places. And also, I agree that it will take staff development. And I think that staff development is available. Just a matter of, making sure that teachers are in on what it is that they need.
But I think,
So, I don't see that we are not gonna do anything. I do see us coming up with, some actionable items.
but I think these ELD strategies, and I'm hoping our reading specialists also, when they're teaching the strategies for reading to the teachers, I would, in my mind, I'm thinking those reading specialists should also be versed in ELD strategies, so they're also using ELD strategies, because guess what? The ELD strategies also help support reading. The scaffolding, the vocabulary preload, and all that stuff helps students in reading. So I'm hoping that these strategies that the coaches, all our coaches, or whatever you want to call them, reading specialists, or ELD, we hire ELD people. It's all about developing our teachers to be able to use differentiation for these students in different strategies and apply it. One of the things about this ELD, the ELD roadmap that I thought was a big eye-opener is, you come in and you're at a certain level and you get X amount of minutes with the ELD person and X amount of this and so forth. Well, this talks more of differentiating for the student's needs, because we all know some kids go, boom, they just zoom right through the language and they need more academic support, and the other ones are slower and they may need different kinds of support. But this whole roadmap talks about differentiating based on their needs, one by one ELD student, which was unique. But that takes a lot of training, a lot of support, and so.
Well, and see, that's my biggest deal for this whole new path we're gonna take, is that limited English speakers, so to speak, are going to be, in this case, the priority of what you look for, because if you have those ELD skills, you already also have them in English. So your reading specialists, in my opinion, and all the people that are gonna deal with that, the coaching, the strategizing, or whatever, is all gonna be with a preference or a push for ELD first, and everything else will trickle down from it. Instead of being, oh, and by the way, do you think you can do it with Spanish speakers too? Because that's the opposite of what we do.
Exactly, I fully agree with you.
Well, good, because that's gonna be your hardest chore, to find that type of quality.
I'm sorry, that guidance actually, it says best practice is not the pull-out from the classroom, but rather first instruction, which we all know first instruction is the best. So best practice, so we want to make sure that classroom teacher has those strategies for differentiation and for language development in every subject. That is what the best practice is.
And
So right from the start, even when we had a program, that's a shift. So we need to get used to that. And they're multilingual learners. You're supposed to be using their native language to support their learning of English.
So Mark, I have a question. Are we gonna plan on continuing with the 2 outreach workers we hired during the pandemic?
Yes.
Yes?
The liaisons we hired
That's the word I'm looking for.
are not really about EL instruction.
Right.
They're more about families and
Right, I
communicating and connecting. Whenever they have an issue, what we see in our district, our Hispanic families struggle with issues because they don't know who to go to, they struggle with the language. They're never guided to say, you know, I can't meet with them. You know, we're fortunate that Maria and Nancy can do that, but we don't have that at Brookside, you know. And so one of the issues is having somebody, this is the go-to.
Right.
They meet at the parents. They should be at IEPs. They should be at everything we do. They should be making those connections. They should be the bridge for the parents.
Right.
And we're gonna keep those in place.
Good.
And they will pay for themselves over time. Because I have found that when I have these issues with parents who struggle with English, we're always on the same page practically. It's just figuring out what page are we on? And so once we get to that page, we're usually good. That's the issue we gotta bridge. And we have to let the Hispanic community know, I have a problem. My kid's having a problem. Who do I talk to? Well, you talk to these people who we know the language, have been through our system, know kids. They can get that started. They're the go-to. They're the help center.
One of the things we talked about also is having parent education classes that actually helps them understand how to navigate the educational system. I know previous districts we've had, I believe it's called PK, Parent Instruction for Quality Education, something, but those classes are really great for parents and just getting to learn how to access the system for their children.
This is Nancy Rudberg, and if I could add, please, something that kind of made me think about when Paula was talking about how we get our teachers, I don't want to just say on board because they are and they care about our EL students, but one thing that Marian Lona and I, we were able to attend a presentation by Iviana Soto, and she was talking about ELL shadowing, and it was something that is part of the master's project that Marian Lona was working on, and she was planning to put it into place right before the pandemic. But it is something that we can use even with our current teachers or in this next year. And what you do is you have your gen ed teachers shadowing students without the students knowing, but they get to see their ELL students in action. And then that I don't want to call it simple information, but it's a lot of information that'll help them to know, whoa, it's not just, yes, I say it louder or say it slower. It's, I need to say it this other way. This is why designated instruction is important. This is why designated instruction is different than integrated. So to echo Maria's comment about how this is a shift, part of that shift is getting to see those students in action, and that's what the ELL shadowing will provide. So that's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Nancy. Any other discussion on this topic? I'm going to switch gears just a little bit and like to the strange face in the room is
No, that's an odd way to.
the extra face in the room that's typically not been here is Joe Aldridge. Joe is will be our new superintendent starting July 1. He'll actually, I believe his first day will actually be around July 8th because he's going to be on vacation a little bit on the East Coast. But so as Mark, actually you'll get used to seeing him around from time to time over the next few weeks. He'll be in and out shadowing Mark from time to time, getting to know the players. And some of you may recognize Joe because he was an employee of the district back in what, 2013
is when I left. So,
okay.
Yep, years ago.
And in fact, if you want to say a few words to introduce yourself,
Certainly.
you do a better job of it than I can.
I'm very excited. My family is very excited to come here and serve our community. You know, over the last 8 years, I've been, I spent 4 years in Lakeport as a director of student services, and then I've been the last 4 years as a superintendent down in Tuolumne County, not too far from Yosemite, so kind of down south just a bit. And, you know, I'm just so excited to bring all of that learning that I've had back and just be a part of the district. And really, I'm excited by the discussions that we've had tonight, just to be able to be a part of the team implementing that and working with everybody to move forward. So I asked Trina to go ahead and set me up with an email. So I do have a Willits Unified email. I think it's just joe.aldridge@WillitsUnified. So no dot, just
No
Joe
dot.
Aldridge. Okay. Feel free to send me an email if you have some questions or just want to say hi. And I'll definitely be in the district on the 16th, 17th, and 18th, and then that following week as well.
Thank you. So, then real quickly, it is a special meeting. We typically don't have room for comments from the CSEA and WTA, but I do try to include you guys. So if Nancy or Dan has any comments, if you guys are out there, or pardon me, Tessa or Dan has any comments, please step in.
Thank you. I do not have any comments this evening.
Thanks, Tessa. How about Dan?
He's not on here.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, so we'll move forward, and I guess we're back to A. Mark?
So, as I refer to the ELO, Extended Learning Opportunities Grant, the district is going to receive $1.1 million. These are targeted funds. These are not spend them however you think makes the most sense. Okay? These are targeted funds that are going to need to go to very specific things that have to do with learning gap loss, trying to solve some of those issues. There is also a targeted amount of this, $109,000, that must be spent on paraprofessionals. Okay, so it's good to have this money. This will answer the question that Jeannie had about financing. So next year we will have these funds. These funds, we believe, we being Nikki and I, over the next one, SSR2, every student can succeed. I don't remember all the acronym for it. Between SRS2 and SR3, over the next 3 years, you should have the funding to sustain this $1 million plan. Okay? Some of those other COVID funds in ESSER, I'll talk about when we talk about bond stuff. They can help supplement part of the bond. But the ESSER money, you will have enough money over the next 3 years, about $1.1 million, to sustain those programs. And so what I've been doing is keeping track of what EL's been doing, what they've been talking about with reading. We've been talking about social emotional learning. We've been talking about summer school. All of these different things we've been trying to figure out and incorporate how we're going to do are represented in this plan. Now, this plan is not locked in stone. This is based on where we're at now. What's our best guess of how to use this? It is not limited to, nor is it perfectly done at 100%. There's no dollar figure in here that you can lock in and say that's going to be the exact amount. But this gives you a roadmap of what we've been talking about, how we would fund it. So the answer to Jeannie's question about how are we going to fund reading specialists, how are we going to fund EL people, how are we going to take care of social emotional learning, how are we going to do that, this is kind of your guideline for it. And so the program description talks about the funding, how the funding can be used. It's very similar to the concentration funds that we get in LCAP, where it talks about foster children, second language kids, kids who are free and reduced, those students, how are you going to make up for their learning loss through COVID? So in this plan, there's all kinds of descriptions. And I put in here all the things you could think about doing. Think simple things, like The district needs to support Nuestra Alianza this summer. We have told them that they have a $45,000 amount from us. Nuestra is gonna have 100 of our Hispanic kids for a summer program. Their focus is math. It's a wonderful program run out of Blosser. This is a rare opportunity, and I do mean rare, where we have funding that we can help a third party like Nuestra put this program on. It's well done, it's well funded, it's long time established in our district. I told the Title III people today, we're not interested in you guys coming in. We're gonna use Nuestra. They are our folks, they're vested in the community. We have a long-standing tradition of working with them. But that's a program that's gonna help with learning loss over the summer. And we can invest in this using these funds because it's our kids. So that's one of those examples. So just like most things, flip back to the budget. That'll, you don't want to listen to my prose and just, my writing skills are limited at best.
Are we going to use 45K from this district and then they use the other funds they get from My Grenade and everyone else? Or?
Generally speaking with Nuestra has to go beg and plead to try and get money. They absolutely wipe themselves out to run the program.
Oh, yeah.
And they use Title III money and stuff. They're gonna still get their Title III money, but initially when we did this, we were concerned that their cohort sizes were gonna have to be so small that they were gonna only offer it for so many kids. And I said, we can't do that. We gotta offer it to all of the kids. So Nikki and I talked about it and said, we looked at the rules, we got a ruling, we can invest in Nuestra to give them money to bring the program out. Well, lo and behold, the 15th, apparently the restrictions are coming off. And when they do, Nuestra can have a better cohort size, and hopefully they won't have to completely decimate their accounts to run the program.
Is this carryover money too? I mean, they have till August 22nd, which is next year.
Yeah, they have some time. You know, I don't know if we'll be able to do this every year.
Yeah.
And part of the answer to that question is, how many EL people did you hire? How many reading people did you hire? Because if you're talking about not funding your own district programs, but funding a third-party program, you probably might get a little heat for that. But even though it's good, I'm not disputing the quality. This is not a quality statement, it's a reality statement.
Well, they're our kids.
Yeah, so I'm really glad we're gonna do that. I think that's gonna be a great thing. So if you look up there, there's extended learning, K-8 summer school, transportation, food service. We're gonna try and transport some kids over the summer to make sure they get to summer school. We've talked to the summer school about having K-8 summer school. The high school's gonna have some. Food services can continue to be on their seamless summer program where they hand out meals to any kid. You don't even have to be our student. You have to just be be here and under 18. The next piece is learning gaps, and this is software, instructional material testing. This is where I'm hoping, when we talked about reading, this is where we're buying some of the benchmark stuff at. This is where we're buying the Acadians testing. This is where we may need to have software that goes along with reading and EL programs. This is kind of the dollar figure I targeted in. Over time, once you get this, you may not need to do it annually. But you're gonna have some materials to put in an EL program and a reading program. This is where it comes from. 280,000, if you look in there, I have worked with Mendocino Youth Project. I'm actually one of their board members. And so I've been working with them. One of the issues is a social, emotional counseling for kids. We don't have a lot of it. Our counselors are tied up with parents and schedules and interacting with kids on the campus. We don't have that social, emotional part.
But our counselors aren't even really that kind of counselors in the first place, right?
Well, they're school counselors. They have some skill sets in that area, but when kids are in crisis and have family issues, sometimes the school person isn't the right person. When you use Mendocino Youth Project, they have behavior therapists, they have all kinds of therapists, they have a whole range of people they can use. And so what I've done with them is we've targeted some things that they could do for us, and I've put together an MOU with them. I haven't signed it yet, but it says not to exceed an amount. And the reason we would do that is we would use their services. We have kids who have crises all the time. I mean, I just heard of a family coming back into the district with all kinds of issues that they're gonna have. Those aren't things we can solve from 8 to 3 in the building. And so this will be using their expertise to help us do that. So that's part of it. One of the positions we have is we have a family therapist at Brookside. This will allow us to maintain that position. It's paraprofessional use at all of the sites. There are a lot of paraprofessionals who aren't mandated special ed, who aren't mandated from some other rationale. They're folks we need to help the building function. They're people who meet the kids, they're people who take kids outside, they're people who supervise kids. They're people who help kids all the time, but they're not mandated. So this is a way to maintain those. Because what you don't want to do is not have the itinerant staff, the support staff, to help the teachers. This is a place where you would do that. This next one, the community one in technology, this is where you see Nuestra Alianza. This is also where you see the family liaison. This is a place where we can fund those because they're going to make a difference. Imagine a Willits where Nuestra is really part of us. Like, imagine if Nuestra had the same status as Kids Club. Imagine if we had family liaisons who were actively engaged and involved, and we put an EL program in place using the right criteria. You're going to make significant gains academically, no doubt about it. Regardless of the reading program, you're going to make significant gains. So here, the next one is, this is summer school for Sanhedrin and the high school. And the reason it's broken out differently is one of the goals of ELO is college prep, college readiness, all of that. So I wanted to distinctly break that out. You don't have to do every goal, but we actually have a plan that is touching every one of the goals. But the dollar figure obviously isn't as large. The big dollar figure you see there, so when you talk about bringing in 5 staff for reading coaches and reading specialists, an EL person, somebody like, although Molly is a retired teacher, bringing her in as a coach or a trainer or whatever, that's where you're going to get the money from. You're going to use the ELO funds, and that's a significant amount. It's practically half of the money we have is tied up into those staff. When you think of staff, remember, if you're talking about a reading specialist, you're not talking about a rookie teacher, okay? You're not talking about somebody at the bottom of the pay scale just starting out. You have to think in terms of about $90,000 when it comes to STRS, PERS, healthcare, and teacher with experience. That's why that number's high. But it needs to be high. And it is not stuck in cement. It is a placeholder based on where we think we would be. And I got that number directly from the reading group. Okay, I didn't make that number up at all. I got it directly from them. The next one, training to engage families and staff, professional development for certified staff and administrative staff. If we want to train teachers on ELs and we want to train teachers on the benchmark program, if you want to have those things in place, you have to have some money set aside to pay teachers for some additional hours. My guess is that dollar figure is the only one in here that I think's low. The problem with that is, remember, you have a mandated $109,000 you have to spend on paraprofessionals. That is a mandate in there. It's not a maybe, it's a must. So that gives you your total funds down at the bottom. I want to preface this with saying, this is a plan that I'm asking the board to approve, understanding it's not limited to. If somebody has a better idea that comes to the surface, you adjust this plan. It's like an LCAP. You adjust the plan. If the dollar figure is not right in here, it's not that relevant. Nikki can make those adjustments. But we have to have a plan that shows the feds, thank you for the funds, we understand your rules, these are the things that would help Willits Unified address the learning gap.
And this is for 1 year only?
This
or
is
the whole
1
3?
year.
Oh, okay.
But when you get your ESSER 2 and your ESSER 3 monies the following year, you can just take this funding that you're doing with this and say it's coming out of ESSER 2 and then ESSER 3 the following year.
But by then, we will have fleshed out both of these programs.
Correct.
And we will have a better handle on
Exactly.
all these various expenditures, made adjustments in the plan.
You will have a sense of where you're going, what's working, what's not working. But you have to wrap your mind around as a board, this COVID money, think of $1 million next year, the following year, and the year after that. That's where you're gonna, in that 3-year window is where you need to work on closing the achievement gap that COVID created. Now, we had one before that, so does every district. But this is money targeted for that you will have no problem spending, and it gives you a source to get it from. That is an external source of money that's not a normal funding thing for us, the one-time money issue. This is what the proposal for the one-time money for $1 million program over each one of the next 3 years.
So Mark, do you think our ADA is gonna go down? Like now, we're held harmless for the next year, I believe, but after that, we're no longer held harmless. Do you think our ADA is gonna decrease?
Yes.
Because all school districts.
Every school in California is probably gonna decrease.
Because that's gonna affect our finances.
First of all, I can tell you 2 reasons why. First of all, there are 50 to 60,000 less births this year in the state of California. That's a number that number is for the first time has gone down. The second thing that tells you that, for the first time in forever, California's population is going down. And I can tell you that because it's $6,000 to rent a moving van to go to Minnesota. That's how many people are taking moving vans out of California. Okay, there is a trend of moving out of state.
They said 180,000? 180,000 people left the state.
Yeah, so yes, your ADA is going to go down, but
Yeah,
remember,
I heard that.
ADA and what you get for ADA, if ADA goes down, but California's economy is doing well, they just put more money towards ADA. The fight should not be, don't give us less per kid because we have less kids. Because having 20, 30 less kids in Willits has nothing to do with your budget. You're
Prop
still
98
employing
sets
the
that.
same number of people.
Yeah, Prop 98 sets the threshold.
Right.
It doesn't matter how many kids are in the state. Prop
Right.
98 is still the threshold.
Right. So I hope that ADA will go up for the state, that they'll finally go, okay, let's stop doing this. Let's put it on ADA or the debt in retirement. Because those help everybody.
Let's put it on enrollment.
Yeah, well, you know.
I know.
Who knows what Caitlin's gonna do as your governor? What I'm telling you is that
I'll be moving to Michigan.
yeah, that's the issue is, really, and you're right, ADA is gonna go down. Nikki's gonna be all over that, okay? She's gonna be looking at ADA, like a dog on a bone. We gotta make sure we get every kid, we do that. You wanna know a way to make ADA go up? Improve your scores. Make people want to come here for your school, okay? I'm gonna just say this one time and I'm gonna never say it again, I'm gonna leave it alone. Sell the property at Blosser, put 100 more houses in the district, those kids gotta go to school somewhere, okay? Those are things that down the road you have to do. But you have this funding is not dependent on ADA.
I understand that, but
Yeah, down the road, you are correct. ADA is going to be an issue. And I'm assuming everybody's going to lose it to certain extents. If we're down 40 or 50 kids, LA's gonna be down 50,000 kids. And so it's gonna be a proportional problem throughout. So I think this is your funding mechanism for it. And again, don't act like, you don't have to say, well, I don't like this number in here or this number in there. Or what about adding something? Think about $1 million next year, the following year, and the year after. Learning loss mitigation. That's what this is about. And I've taken everybody's stuff into account with social emotional, EL, reading, after school, Nuestra, software, personnel. This is what I believe is your best shot at really making a big difference.
So if we were to look at this, not specifically the plan, but if we were to look at the EL and the K3, K5 reading plan, portions of those kind of melt together. For example, those reading specialists, for example, those people could be essentially dual function to a certain degree. Am I not correct?
It
So-
could, depends on the skill of the person.
Well, it depends on the skill of the person, also depends on how we write.
Professional development also.
Yeah.
It also depends on how we write those job descriptions.
Right.
So at some point, very soon, we need to look at those potential job descriptions and see what we can put out there.
However, we do have to consider that we may have to develop our own people. So maybe someone doesn't have all the ELD skills, but we bring in the professional, we send them to PD where they can learn those skills, they can observe those skills being taught, so they can bring it back here, which is more than likely, because we're not gonna find that many reading specialists or EL. They're gonna have to be developed. We'll have to develop them and put it in the budget.
Right. The only thing not in here from the reading program is the 2 additional staff for class size.
Right.
And I'll give you a reason why. Class size used to be something in the federal money, they gave you money for class size reduction. It doesn't exist anymore. As a district, just bringing in staff to reduce class size is not going to make a difference.
I was reading something recently, and I don't recall exactly where, apparently there was some legislation that was working its way through either the federal or the state government that was talking about reducing, I think it was kindergarten and first grade.
Yes.
Certainly kindergarten, but they wanted a 1-to-12 ratio.
Right.
But again, that's not been,
And I will tell you, number one, that is a massively expensive proposition.
from a facility standpoint alone, not just teachers.
Yeah, well, and before you even get to facilities, where are you going to find double the number of kindergarten teachers you have right now? You're not going to. And so you will have a boatload of teachers who are young rookies, don't have credentials, right,
Yes,
Paula?
I know, I'll be upset.
And so when they don't have that, they're not gonna help your performance. Remember, an A teacher with 25 always does better than a C teacher with 15.
So I want to say that we have to keep in mind that every other school district in California, actually every other school district in the United States, is getting the same funds.
Correct.
And they're all tasked with
Similar problems.
learning loss mitigation. And so they're going to be looking for the same staff.
I will tell you that, and I can tell you for sure, Minnesota did not do ELO plans like this and target the money. Minnesota did it by ADA and gave it to each school who are gonna report at the end of the year how they used it to help. They took a very different approach.
Right.
Yeah.
we're different here.
I know.
Well, there are a lot of Midwestern, Southern Midwestern schools that already have
Yeah,
class
see,
sizes.
We're special.
Unfortunately, in the Midwest, they believe in common sense and they actually don't need the ed code you guys need because they think local control works. But-
They're so confused.
Yeah,
Let's talk to their
but-
people.
Like I said, Mark, we're special.
Yeah, but the reality is, that's a great question, Jeannie. This is kind of your funding plan, and if you guys can keep your focus on 1.1, how are we gonna use that and do that? Keep it in this venue, and you have your funding for the next 3 years. At the end of 3 years, you'll be able to say, this worked, this didn't work, we don't need as much of this anymore, or we need something else. But you gotta go a 3-year window to see where you're at.
Can we have a motion to approve in a second?
I have a request, and it's actually from our audience. They could not see Joe's face, and we have people out there who want to see your face.
So you gotta go stick your face up in
Yeah,
front.
I can go get real close.
Can you just say
Did
one
you-
more greeting?
Hi, everyone. I'm Joe Aldridge. Can't wait to work
Hi,
with
Joe.
everybody. Hi, Nikki.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Hi, Joe.
And I move to adjourn.
No,
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 no.
no. Don't cut me off, Robert. I second. Give me that gavel.
Oh, I thought we were adjourned.
So why don't you go ahead, Diane?
I move that we accept the Expand Learning Opportunity Grant Plan.
Do we have a second?
I second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion on the expanded opportunity grant plan? None? Anything from the gallery? Hearing none, call for the vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. There you go, Mark.
Okay, I will give you a quick update on bond issue. On the bond issue, I'm gonna go building by building, and I'll start with the easy ones. Sanhedrin, we've fixed multiple things at Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin is all recarpeted, offices and classrooms. We have fixed some of the appliances in there that needed to be fixed, and Sanhedrin's in pretty good shape. If you go to Blosser, the new roof is almost done. I'll answer this question because I've already had 3 people. They didn't cover that metal up on the roof. Your roof has a metal strip that's up at the top. That is zinc. Zinc does not allow moss and mold to grow. And so when the water rolls over it from a rain, it oxidizes it and it doesn't let moss and mold grow.
Carries a little bit of it down
Yeah.
slope and does it.
That's why you have roofs with all this moss on. If you put zinc or copper, it stops that from happening. So the roofs are all done. The cafeteria at Blosser had that horrible cork floor that was all torn up. That, by the end of the week, that will all be replaced. It's all brand new white tile. The doors going into the cafeteria don't work well. Those are getting replaced. The fire stream that comes from the hydrant into the building was done in PVC pipe a while ago. I don't know who did it. It doesn't matter at this point. But that had to be replaced because we were spewing a lot of water because it won't hold the pressure. Those need to be steel or what they call new fabricated pipe now that uses fiberglass and plastic. Because it has 60 pounds of pressure. That's before they kick the truck up. And so it would have blown the lines out. So that's getting replaced. We are in place next year to have our 2 production kitchens, the high school and Blosser. That will be in place. Blosser also has new heating and cooling units. Everyone's been replaced. The 5th grade wing had what's called residential gas packs that you would put literally like on a trailer. Those are all replaced. They are brand new, more efficient gas pack units. They heat, cool, and air exchange the room at a much higher level. The drinking fountain program's all in place at Blosser. What else at Blosser?
Excuse me, at Blosser, can you control your own heat and cooling?
They are controlled within a range. So a teacher has a slight range. The reason they're not set to go for just room control, I know a lot of folks like that. Unfortunately, folks leave and they turn their room down to 65, and it's 65 for 3 days while they're gone over a 3-day weekend. So the room sets within a range. And that's a principal thing I think we need to talk about. I know some people like it colder and hotter in their room. The biggest issue in the rooms with heating and cooling is in COVID world, everybody's throwing the doors open and opening the windows. Well, then they turn the air purifier on, and all that air is blowing right through the room. The air purifier is not doing anything. Unfortunately, the heating unit's going, oh my God, the room's 64, I gotta heat the room up. And the heater's running full blast all the time.
See, I
Hopefully, when we
understand.
get out of COVID, we won't do that anymore.
Oh, okay, I've talked to some teachers, they don't seem to know whether they're supposed to shut their doors when the room heater thing, that's not a heater, the purifier is on, or not, and you've got it all over the place where all the machines run at once. That can't be good, you said
So,
it burned them out.
right, and so your heating and cooling unit in Diane's classroom now at Blosser, that heating and cooling unit is designed to keep the room between 68 to 72.
All year round?
All the time, whether it needs heat or cool, it will do that. That's assuming the room is closed up.
Okay.
The air purifier works better when the room's closed up because there's nothing taking it out the door.
Yeah.
In order to use those rooms, as long as you have a reasonable amount of airflow going through and you're not dropping the temperature dramatically in the room, it's not going to kick on to heat. But I'm trying to work with our maintenance staff and the teachers to not cook these. We lost 3 heating units over at Brookside because of it. And I understand in COVID world you want to breeze. Unfortunately, our solution in multiple rooms has been we took the thermostat and moved it up to the ceiling. Because that way the heating and cooling unit's going, oh, I'm fine. But down below it was 62. So we've had to play some reindeer games with that, and that was a COVID thing.
But probably that'll be worked out.
That
more or
should be
less.
worked out when you're in a normal year.
Okay.
The other things, let's move to the next building at Bechtel. Bechtel's gym floor, if you've not seen the gym floor at Bechtel, it is phenomenal. It's beautiful, it was sanded to bare wood, the inside of the gym looks good, the roof is brand new. Bechtel is also having, the heating and cooling units are getting replaced. The windows and heating and cooling units in the cafeteria and the office are being replaced. The biggest issue that we have at Bechtel, the high school and Brookside, are all those glass windows that go along. Part of this SR2 money next year is for ventilation. One of the ways to use this funds, because they're one-time funds, it can help our bond issue. I'm having our architect look at blowing out all those windows along those. Imagine when you go to Brookside, Bechtel, and the high school, you see all these long wings of glass. Take them all out, put in new E-glass 2/3 of the way down, which means you don't need those horrible curtains anymore. And the bottom window actually opens and lets breeze in and out. It would improve the look of the building, it would improve the airflow of the building. Places like Brookside, where you have windows on both sides, you could have great airflow in those rooms.
Plus you'll get dual pane insulated
Right.
glass, so
Yeah.
efficiency goes up.
Yeah, its R value goes way up, it'll heat and cool better. It's a great solution to use some of those COVID money for. I don't want to give you sticker shock, but it's probably in a 900,000 range to do that. And part of that is because it's taking the structural windows out, the state's going to hit us with DSA stuff. They're probably going to go to bathrooms and make us upgrade some bathrooms. We have to.
That's good.
Yeah, I love DSA. I'm not sure how you equate windows in a room to having to fix the urinals, but they do. So, but that's one of the major projects that has to get done, is replacing those windows out. It'll help airflow, it'll save heating and cooling, it'll take out the ugly curtains in the room. The teachers will be able to have e-glass, so it's not gonna be reflecting all that light in the room where you can't see the TV or board. So that's going to happen. Some of the other things that are going on, if you come up to the high school, you've seen the new hallway in the high school. There's new carpet in the band room, the offices. There is also at the high school, you see our parking lots. And let's just say, out of all the projects, they're all going really well except one. The high school parking lot's got some issues. We found 2 exposed diesel tanks underground that used to fuel the furnace for the pool. Neither of which were on any map we had. Neither one was mitigated. One had a little bit of stuff in it, and there's some oily smell when you get to it. The other tank is 500 gallons completely full of diesel fuel. So,
Who do you want to sell that to?
yeah, well, unfortunately, it's from 1985.
Oh!
I believe it's 1985, the fuel.
Yes. Oh,
So
yeah.
what happened was, in the mid-80s, they upgraded the furnace in there to gas, and they just came right off the road, put gas in, and left the tanks. So now we have to mitigate that. So that's gonna cost them some bucks. They're telling me that there is a fund for mitigation of environmental hazards that schools have access to. So I'm hoping I'm gonna get some of that funding. But you will see the circle turnaround's gonna be repaved, the road back to maintenance will be repaved, and that parking lot will get fixed. That huge break in the middle of that parking lot is gonna be a cement trough that runs off over by the baseball fields and allows that area to drain. And
The
so-
one that currently floods, right?
Yeah, yeah, it will drain off. There are a ton of projects going on besides that. There are all kinds of, the high school's glass. 6 years ago, they put glass on the back of the high school, new glass. Well, Roundtree is going to do the rest of the building. So the entire high school will now have, every room will have its own heating and cooling unit, which it had none before, and its own air exchange, and the windows will be replaced.
You're talking about the main building.
The main building. Because the Titanic's boiler that we have is only going to be doing the auditorium. So even if the boiler blows, it's just the auditorium. And if that happens, my suggestion would be just leave the old boiler alone, put in a new, small, efficient boiler that would, because all it's got to do is the auditorium. So there are tons of projects going on. You can hardly bat an eye without seeing stuff getting done. The 2 big projects, Brookside has a big project. It is the West Wing. The West Wing has 6 rooms in it right now and a bathroom at the end. We only really use 4 of them. So the plan is to take them all out, put in 4 portable rooms and a bathroom there. And the reason you would put portables in there, first of all, stick-built would be incredibly expensive. But it would be foolish to spend $3 million to put in a stick-built rooms for 4 or 5 rooms when they're attached to a building that's from 1950. You're gonna have to address the 1950 building long before you'll ever have to deal with those portables again. Because remember, they're 50 years old and they were bought used. So we got a lot of work to do on the other part of the building before you spend a ton of money there. But we can fix that up. That's going to be scheduled, it's already, design's already in place. That'll get done. Along with the windows, those 2 projects are already with our architectural guy looking at to get them done. So he's gonna inherit, meeting down Almeida, who's putting it all together to get it done. So your next draw of money, I would expect to be sometime like December, not next year December, the following December would be the next time you'd probably do a draw. Some other projects that are all, I mean, they're all over the place. We fixed equipment. Our maintenance and custodial staff have equipment needs, and we've been taking care of some of those. So we have the equipment to fix the stuff that we've not had before. i.e. the example is putting the kids' pictures up along the road. That was the bucket truck. Without that, they can't do it. So we have equipment to do the stuff we need to do. In transportation, we bought a handicap van. We have a big handicap bus. It's one of the mid-sized buses. What we don't have in transportation, those short buses that can take handicapped kids are a constant fix and repair nightmare. We need to get rid of those. One we can sell back off, one we just need to take and unload. We're getting a van through COVID money. It is a Ford Transit van that has a side opening that you can put 2 handicapped wheelchairs in. That way we can take, when we have one of our kids who's handicapped in a wheelchair, we can take that van with the whole group of school kids where they go somewhere. They can use a van. They don't have to have the gigantic cheese wagon to transport one child. And it gives us a backup for if we have another one, we can use that as a transportation. And remember, because it's a van, you don't have to have all that bus driver certification. So it will help our transportation. We also use some state COVID money. We have 3 more transit vans. So in the last 3 years now, we have 7 new vans. Plus we're going to get this handicapped one. That's really important. That's how a lot of our teams and clubs and groups travel. It's a lot of how we do some special ed traveling. I've done the run multiple times when we have a driver not available because I can drive the van. We need to have those things in place. Those are all in place. Every single project we've talked about, there's 15 more of them I didn't even talk about that are on my board.
The science rooms at Bechtel Grove?
Yep, we have, oh, thank you. We have 2 real science rooms now in Bechtel Grove. Water, power, electrical work, the room's been painted, the floor's been tiled. We have real science rooms there. These science rooms over here, there's new furniture in, we've torn apart all the sinks. This one will have all the power, all the sinks, everything fixed in them in our science wing at the high school. So I can't even remember all, I'd have to have a sheet in front of me. I have a full board of them in my office, and I just keep checking them off as we do them. And it's a never-ending list, by the way.
Yeah.
But we're in pretty good shape. And I want to tell you, this has been my favorite board meeting since I've been here. Because now that I only have 1 or 2 of them left, I get to reminisce back to where I started 5 years ago, okay? We had a boatload of things going on, and let me tell you, we were not talking about EL, we were not talking about reading, we were not talking about what are we gonna do with this fund balance, it's growing. We weren't talking about what are we gonna do, how are we gonna sustain this program and fix it over 3 years. We are finally now as a board and a district in a position where we're actually at a board meeting talking about academic stuff, and we have money and plans to fix our facilities that were bad. We're in the right place, and you're going in the right direction. The issue for me was very simple. Yeah, it took a lot of eye poking and nose and making people upset and making some people happy, but you're now in the right position. You're talking about the right stuff. You have facility funding to fix facilities. You're talking about kids teaching and learning. That's what boards should be doing. So it's been fun to see it happen, and you're in a good place. So congratulations, you've graduated to doing what boards should be doing.
It's definitely different. I've got a couple quick questions.
Yeah,
One is status of the bond oversight committee.
the Bond Oversight Committee, I'll have another meeting coming up here in about, I think we're gonna wait till after graduation. But I meet with them, their minutes are on our website. Nikki puts together for me all our expenditures that we do, it's out on the website. You'll see the minutes from the meeting, the expenditures and the projects we're doing. And so,
So under what on our website?
if you go to our
I've looked at-
website, you'll see under there, it'll say like, I believe it says Measure I still. It's Measure I, and if you click on that, you'll see the Oversight Committee, and it's the minutes from the meetings, it's
Okay.
all the stuff that they do.
I couldn't find it, so
Yeah.
I'll look.
And the reality is now that we're out of COVID paranoia where we can actually kind of get together, I promised them that I would bring them, we're gonna go site to site. And I want them to see the things that we've been doing. Because it's really great to see them,
Mark, when you schedule that, I'd be interested in tagging along.
okay?
Yeah, me too.
And, you know, one of the facilities we don't really talk about here because it doesn't get funded through the school, but the school farm needs to have an open house, so you folks need to go see it. It is fantastic. We have one of the better school farms you will ever run across. It's so good, you can have a prom in it.
So I heard.
We just had a prom with 140 kids at the school farm.
That's great.
It was awesome. And that facility has grown tremendously. You know, there's all kinds of stuff. I mean, I go on and on. We have a plasma cutter now for our shop area. And I'm trying to get the folks to cut the hole in the side so we can vent it. I mean, we're in a good place.
Do we have a barn?
We have 3.
Yeah.
That's what I.
Well, we
thought.
actually have 4.
Okay.
There's a
I
goat
had
barn,
that
there's a
too.
sheep barn, there's the big display barn, and then there's a silver one that used to be there.
Okay.
So,
But
2
all
of,
the prom was outside, right?
it was
Oh,
inside the
barn.
big barn.
Inside the big barn.
The
I
big
understood
barn,
it was
The big barn.
outside
Yep.
and I couldn't.
the big
Okay.
barn has stall doors all around it. So you slide the stall doors open, you lift up the garage door, you steal Mr. Chavez's heaters from the pool, and you put them out there, and you have a warm space with lots of lights. There are LED lights inside there, and so it's nice and bright. It was a great prom. Parents did a great job. This was truly a parent prom. The parents said, we want a prom for our kids. Mike said, hey, let's use the barn. I said, yeah, let's use the barn. We cleaned it all up out there. Then they came in, decorated it up. The parents did all of it. It was awesome.
Did you charge for it? I mean, did that go into the junior fund?
I don't
or-
remember if they charged or
They
not.
did.
Did they?
Oh, okay.
So next
It
question.
was minimal. whatever.
Yeah, it was a discounted, yeah.
So
Good,
next
thanks.
question is,
I had
the
heard such
pool,
a story and I couldn't-
that's a city property.
Mhm.
My assumption is those tanks are on city property.
No.
Really?
The city, this is a bizarre thing. This is the pool, the tennis courts, and Beckel Gym.
Belong to Willits.
When?
Those are
No, I didn't
3
Well, it looks
city
Looks good.
pieces, those are 3 city facilities on school property. They do not own the property, we own the property.
Got it, okay.
So.
Well, that makes us responsible.
Well, here's the biggest deal. First of all, before we start talking about pool, folks, we have spent a fortune renovating the pool. You open the inside door of the pool, there's nothing in there that was there 5 years ago. It's all redone. It runs great. We got help one time from Howard Hospital and the city. They each gave us 10 grand for the heater. Other than that, everything else has been us.
Including the cover?
The
That's
cover
gonna
is
be-
us too. It's the bond issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and in October, you'll be dropping your balloon over the pool,
Mhm.
and you will have an indoor pool, take it down and have your outdoor pool. You'll see a shed out there. The shed is where you're gonna store that, and it's also where you're gonna actually store the pool chemicals, because these 100-pound bales of chemical
Yeah.
are all stored up here, and we gotta cart them down there all the time. Now we can just unload them. in preparation for Brookside, one of the rooms we use at Brookside in the West Wing is just a storage room. I mean, we just throw junk in it. So knowing we don't want to build a portable classroom to be a junk room, we went over there where we had taken out that preschool garden, an old little dumpy building that was there. There is now a 24 by 30 storage building there. So they will have their storage there. It's just not going to be a classroom space, because that's an incredibly expensive storage.
Is that building already in place?
Yeah.
It is,
That was
it's great.
fast.
Yeah.
I mean, we walked through there just a few weeks ago.
Our guys laid the cement, and after the cement was done, the company came in, it was done in a day. They came for 2 days, did the one at the pool, and then went over to Brookside, did the one there. And so we have 2 pole buildings that are very similar to the barn. And so, yeah, I can't even remember all the projects because I just stumble on them over as we go through them. But my goal is to get everything I can get done on schedule and ready to go. And we'll be in good shape. Our facilities will be way better than they've been before. Nobody will wonder what you've done with your bond money. There'll be no question about what you've been doing. And the biggest one that I forgot to mention, we have a $780,000 expense to roof the high school, Bechtel, and Brookside. Your 4 major facilities will all have new roofs on them by July, end of July. That is a huge thing to get off the plate. You gotta start at the top. If you're taking in water, everything else goes to hell. And so, we're in good shape. I feel real good about where the facilities are. You know, I wish we had a brand new building, but we don't. That's not gonna happen. So.
And so the maintenance crew that exists can do all the inside repairs then, once these big outside ones are done? Or while they're done?
Most of
being
them,
done?
unless it requires a special certification. Our people are doing the renovating of the science wing.
Okay.
The inside renovation, they did all the stuff over at Bechtel too, other than the floor. Cash Carpet does the floor. And I will tell you, if anybody ever asks, do you have local vendors? They're all local folks. Everybody who's here doing it is from our area. We're using tons of local people. You know, Valley Paving's right out of Redwood Valley. The only people who are from Santa Rosa even are the roofing people, just because you have to have a big bonded, big company to be able to do them.
And bathroom repairs, sinks, faucets, all
Yep.
that kind of stuff that.
We can do that.
Okay, and so
Yeah.
that'll probably be done eventually, one would figure, but it'll
Yeah.
go back to the giving them tickets and getting it done.
Well,
I mean, there seem to be a few that are still at each site. I figure if you're redoing a bathroom, you don't have to care about whether or not the faucet works, but.
I would tell you that there are certain restrooms in the district, especially at this site,
They're the worst. but-
that I would take them all out. And I would redo the entire bathroom. The scary part when you do that is, when you take up, well, it has nothing to do with what water you're gonna find.
Yeah, no.
It has to do with when you pull that stool out, for example, and you start doing that, if you're renovating that bathroom, DSA is gonna knock on your door. It's different than we have a broken stool and we put a new one in. They allow that to happen. But if you go through and you change the water, you change the windows, you change the flooring, if you renovate it, you're gonna have DSA in your pocket.
Well, at Brookside, I'd be concerned with the pipes. I mean, some of the issues
Oh,
with
yeah.
all that never went away.
And again, there are some of those, my advice will be when you do your next draw, because this money for this bond, by the time you get done with Brookside's wing, you'll have gone through your 4. Your next draw, I would target all of those bathrooms, especially Brookside. But be careful at Brookside where you spend money. You're gonna put a $30,000 bathroom on an 80-year-old building. So sometimes you have to rethink that about what you wanna do. And so there are some issues there, you know, and I'll give Joe some issues about some of the ways to fix up, especially Brookside. Because we're talking about the west wing of Brookside. If you go to the east side of Brookside, those are all portables.
Across the way.
On the other side.
Yeah.
Yeah, both sides are lined with portables. So you're 7 or 8 years away from all of those. And there's some ways to fix that, okay, without getting DSA and doing all that stuff. I have a company coming up to see me, I think Thursday morning. They actually renovate portables. They go in, they'll replace the whole floor, they'll fix the roof, they'll fix anything on your portable you want to do. And that way you're still fixing and repairing, you're not replacing. When you replace,
Yes,
assume it's going to be at least twice to 3 times more. So
Well,
I'll have
bathrooms are
all
a
that
big
stuff in
issue
place.
all over the district.
that's another one of the things that's broken in our system,
Yeah.
very badly broken.
But your facilities are way better. You're in really pretty good shape. As I refer to my grow in the back, we are close to having the water running like it's supposed to every day and good. We're gonna bring dirt in, we're gonna cover the top of it again, top dress it, and by fall, you'll have a nice practice field there.
The one for soccer by the fence?
The other
No,
side.
not that.
The one next to the railroad.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a hard one for me to
Trust
believe,
me,
that's a
that's
disaster.
We're gonna put a
Okay.
couple inches of dirt over the top of it, weed, feed, and seed, a couple inches of dirt over the top, and if you can put water on it, as Chris Neary would tell you, even a rock would grow in Willits if water hits it.
Yeah.
And grass will grow really well.
I'm more concerned with the holes they fall in.
That's what we're
because
doing,
otherwise
is we're
yeah.
spreading out dirt on it.
I'll
It's
take
called
one
top
2
dressing.
inches.
Yeah, it's called top dressing. Yeah, it'll work.
There are a couple of fields that could actually use some of that.
Oh, yeah,
Hopefully you can work on the one over at Bechtel as well.
yeah.
Gloucester has some pretty good holes too.
And Blosser's
Top
got,
dressing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Blosser and
upstairs.
Bechtel both need that, but man, the good news is, we have equipment where we can actually do it. And thanks to Alex, I found somebody who actually, we're gonna use a manure spreader to spread the dirt. And so,
That's-
can you imagine the talents I have?
I know, I never knew them.
And Alex with the shovel.
I knew it was full of it, I didn't know you could fling
Full of
it.
it, I believed, yeah. This is no.
No, actually, that's not one of my skills, but I did turn Mark onto somebody who has that skill.
Well, all you have to do, see, that's teacher in you. If you just know where to direct them, you're doing just fine. You don't have to have all the info.
And technology-wise, you're 1-to-1 K-12, that's not going anywhere. And you have ample backups, you have ample replacements, that's already in place.
But it is something we have to continue to maintain and, recycle the old, bring in the new.
Yeah.
Are we done?
Yep. Robert wants to say.
I think they're done.
Did Robert want to say something?
No, no.
Other than make a motion to
I'll
adjourn?
move to adjourn.
There's been a motion to adjourn, is there a second?
I second.
I'll second.
It's been seconded by pretty much everyone.
Second it fast
All
enough.
those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you to the gallery, appreciate everybody coming to the meeting.
My wife's waiting outside for this.
Oh.
Because we came to
Bye,
the same
then.